A man buried his hands into splintered wood and broken dreams, knowing that beneath the rubble, two hearts were fading with every passing second. This is the story of Caleb Turner, a cowboy who rode into tragedy and walked away with a family he never knew he needed. What began as screams echoing through a Montana valley became a bond that would defy loss, loneliness, and the brutal hand that frontier life dealt to those brave enough or foolish enough to build something worth keeping. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the spring of 1873. The wind that morning carried something wrong. Caleb Turner had been riding fence lines for 3 days straight, checking for breaks in the wire that kept Old Man Garrett's cattle from wandering into the valleys where wolves still hunted in packs. The work was solitary, the kind that let a man think too much, or not at all, depending on what ghosts he was running from. For Caleb, it was usually the latter. At 32, he'd already lived enough for 2 lifetimes: a childhood on a failing farm in Missouri, a father who drank himself to death, a mother who followed 6 months later from a broken heart disguised as pneumonia. Then came the war, though Caleb didn't like to call it that. The war was something glorious, something worth the dying. What he'd seen was just boys killing boys over ideas neither side fully understood. So he drifted west after Appomattox, looking for something he couldn't name. Montana Territory offered space, and space offered forgetting. He hired on with ranchers, drove cattle, broke horses that had more spirit than sense, and kept to himself. Men respected that out here. A man's past was his own business, sealed up tight as a letter nobody bothered to open. But that morning, the wind carried something that made him pull up his horse, a big roan gelding named Judge, and turn his head toward the eastern ridge. A sound. Faint, almost swallowed by the breeze moving through the new grass. But there. A human sound. A scream. Caleb's first instinct was to dismiss it. Sound played tricks in these valleys, bouncing off rock faces and timber stands until you couldn't tell if what you were hearing was 100 yards away or a mile. Could be anything. A mountain lion making a kill. An eagle. Hell, even the wind through a dead tree could sound like a woman crying if you were lonely enough and foolish enough to listen for it. But then it came again, clearer this time, desperate. Help, please, somebody help! Judge felt the change in Caleb before Caleb fully registered it himself. The horse's ears pricked forward, muscles bunching beneath the saddle. Caleb didn't need to kick him. He just loosened the reins, and Judge took off at a gallop, hooves drumming against the earth in a rhythm that matched the sudden hammering of Caleb's heart. The valley opened up before them, green and gold with spring growth, dotted with purple lupine and Indian paintbrush. Beautiful country. Deadly country. The kind of place where a man could build a life or lose one, sometimes in the span of a single day. Caleb had seen both. He'd helped bury 3 settlers the previous winter, a family who'd tried to make it through on insufficient supplies and too much faith. The father had been found frozen, halfway to the nearest town, trying to get help that came 2 days too late. The screaming grew louder as Caleb cleared the ridge, and that's when he saw it. A cabin, or what was left of one, crushed beneath a massive pine tree that must have stood 70 feet tall before it fell. The trunk was easily 3 feet across at the base, and it had come down directly on the structure's roof, pancaking the center and causing both walls to buckle inward like a house of cards. Debris was everywhere: splintered logs, shattered glass, torn fabric that might have been curtains, personal belongings scattered like the contents of a life turned upside down and shaken. "Help! We're trapped! Please!" The voice was coming from inside the wreckage, a woman's voice, hoarse with terror and exertion. Caleb was off Judge before the horse fully stopped, hitting the ground hard and running toward the collapsed structure. His mind was already calculating angles, structural integrity, where the weight was distributed. He'd seen buildings collapse during the war. Artillery fire could turn a farmhouse into kindling in seconds, and he knew that one wrong move could bring the whole thing down. "I'm here!" he shouted, circling the wreckage, trying to find the best entry point. "Keep talking so I can find you." "We're in the back corner." The voice was strained now, pain edging into the fear. "The bedroom! The tree! It came through the roof! I can't move it! My baby—" The word hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. A baby. There was a baby in there. He He found the spot where her voice was strongest, the back right corner, where a portion of the wall still stood, though it was leaning at a dangerous angle. A support beam had fallen diagonally across what must have been a doorway, creating a narrow gap. Caleb dropped to his knees, peering into the darkness beyond. It took his eyes a moment to adjust, but when they did, his breath caught. A woman, maybe 25, was pinned beneath a section of the roof. She was on her side, her body curled protectively around something, a bundle of blankets that moved slightly. The baby. A beam lay across her back and legs, heavy enough to trap her, but not, miraculously, heavy enough to crush her. Yet. The whole structure was groaning, settling, finding its new equilibrium. How long that would take, and how much more it would collapse in the process, was anybody's guess. "Ma'am, my name's Caleb Turner. I'm going to get you out, but I need you to stay as still as possible. Can you do that?" "Hurry." Her face was pale in the dim light, streaked with blood from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were fierce, locked on his. "Please, my daughter." "I will. I promise." Caleb had no idea if he could keep that promise, but he said it anyway, because some promises needed to be made even if they couldn't be kept. "What's your name?" "Eliza. Eliza Monroe." "All right, Eliza, I'm going to start moving debris. If anything shifts, you tell me right away. Understood?" She nodded, wincing at the movement. Caleb pulled back and assessed the situation properly. The support beam blocking the gap was his first obstacle. It was pinned under the weight of the collapsed roof on one end, but the other end was resting on what looked like part of the door frame. If he could shift that, he might be able to widen the gap enough to crawl through. But there was no way to know what removing it would do to the rest of the structure. He gripped the beam with both hands, testing its weight. Heavy. Probably 200 pounds, maybe more. He braced his feet, took a breath, and pulled. The beam didn't move. Caleb adjusted his grip, finding better purchase. His back was already protesting. He'd wrenched it badly 2 weeks ago wrestling a steer, but he ignored the sharp spike of pain and pulled again. This time the beam shifted. Just an inch, but it moved. Encouraged, Caleb reset his stance and threw everything he had into it. The beam suddenly gave way and Caleb stumbled backward as it rolled free, crashing into the dirt beside the cabin. The gap was wider now, maybe 2 feet across. Enough. He was on his belly immediately, squirming through the opening. Splinters tore at his shirt and gouged his arms, but he barely felt them. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of fresh-cut wood and something else. Blood and fear, the scent of people in mortal danger. "I'm coming to you, Eliza. Hold on." The interior was a nightmare of collapsed timber and darkness. The massive pine trunk had punched through the center of the roof, and everything had fallen inward from that point. Caleb had to crawl on his belly, pushing aside smaller debris, working his way toward the back corner where Eliza was trapped. His hands found broken dishes, a boot, a child's rag doll, evidence of a life being lived before catastrophe struck. "Can you hear me?" Eliza's voice came from just ahead, strained. "I'm almost there." Caleb pushed aside a section of roofing and found himself looking directly at her. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 22 or 23. Pretty, even in her current state, dark hair matted with blood and dust, green eyes wide with terror and determination. The baby was still clutched to her chest, wrapped in a quilt that had seen better days. A tiny face peeked out, eyes closed, mouth moving in the instinctive sucking motion of an infant. "How old?" Caleb asked, reaching out to test the beam that pinned Eliza down. 4 months. Her name's Rose." Eliza's voice cracked. Will she be all right?" "She looks perfect," Caleb lied. Truth was, he couldn't tell in the darkness whether the baby was injured or not, but Eliza needed hope more than she needed honesty right now. "I'm going to lift this beam off you. When I do, you need to move fast. Can you do that?" "I think so. My leg, I think it might be broken. We'll deal with that after." Caleb positioned himself as best he could in the confined space, getting his hands under the beam. It was awkward as hell, his leverage all wrong, but there was no other way. "On 3. 1, 2, 3, Caleb strained, putting every ounce of strength into the lift. For a terrible moment, the beam didn't budge, and he thought he'd misjudged, that it was too heavy, that he'd have to go back and find help, and hope Eliza and her baby could hold out that long. But then, slowly, agonizingly, the beam began to rise. "Go!" he gasped through clenched teeth. "Now!" Eliza didn't hesitate. She rolled out from under the beam, cradling Rose with one arm and using the other to drag herself forward. She was right about her leg. It wasn't working properly, either broken or badly injured. But she moved with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child, and within seconds, she was clear. Caleb let the beam drop. It crashed down, and the entire structure shuddered. A cascade of smaller debris fell from above, and somewhere deeper in the wreckage, something groaned and shifted. They were out of time. "Can you crawl?" Caleb asked. "Yes." Eliza's face was set in grim determination. "Then follow me, fast as you can. This whole thing's about to come down." He went first, clearing a path as best he could, tossing aside anything that might impede Eliza's movement. Behind him, he could hear her labored breathing, the soft whimpering of the baby, the scrape of her body against the floor as she pulled herself along. Every second felt like an hour. Every small sound from the collapsing cabin made his heart jump. They were halfway to the gap when the structure really began to fail. It started with a crack like a rifle shot, one of the remaining support beams giving way. Then the whole back wall began to lean inward, slowly at first, then faster. Dust exploded into the air, and the groaning of stressed wood became a roar. "Move!" Caleb shouted, but Eliza was already moving, fear giving her strength she didn't know she had. He reached the gap and twisted around, reaching back for her. "Give me your hand!" She stretched out, Rose clutched tight to her chest with her other arm, and their fingers met. Caleb grabbed her wrist and pulled, hauling her toward the opening even as debris rained down around them. She screamed as her injured leg dragged across the rough floor, but she didn't let go, didn't stop fighting. Caleb pulled her through the gap just as the back wall fully collapsed. The roar was deafening, and a blast of dust and splinters shot out through the opening like a shotgun blast. Caleb threw himself over Eliza and the baby, shielding them with his body as the cabin completed its transformation from home to grave. When the noise finally stopped, the silence was almost shocking. Caleb raised his head cautiously. Dust hung in the air like fog, making it hard to see more than a few feet. His ears were ringing, and his back felt like it had been beaten with a board. But he was alive. They were alive. "Eliza?" He rolled off her, checking for injuries. "Are you all right?" She was coughing, gasping for air, but she nodded. Her grip on Rose had never loosened. The baby was crying now, a strong, healthy cry that was the most beautiful sound Caleb had ever heard. "We need to move," Caleb said, getting to his feet. His legs were shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, but they held. That tree could still shift. "Come on." He bent and scooped Eliza up as gently as he could, careful of her injured leg. She was lighter than he expected, thin in the way of frontier women who worked too hard and ate too little. Rose was sandwiched between them, still crying lustily. Good. Crying meant breathing, meant alive, meant fighting. Out here, fighting was everything. Caleb carried them away from the wreckage, not stopping until they were a good 50 yards clear. Only then did he gently set Eliza down on a patch of grass near where Judge stood waiting, reins trailing. The horse had barely moved, trained by years of ranch work to stay ground-tied no matter what chaos erupted around him. "Let me see," Caleb said, kneeling beside Eliza. She was in bad shape. The cut on her forehead was still bleeding, though not as badly as he'd feared. Her dress was torn, revealing bruises blooming purple and black across her arms and shoulders. Her right leg was bent at an angle that made Caleb's stomach turn, definitely broken, probably in 2 places. But she was alive, and Rose was alive, and given how close they'd come to being buried in that cabin, alive was nothing short of a miracle. "Let me look at Rose," Caleb said gently. Eliza hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the quilt. The baby was red-faced from crying, her tiny fists waving in indignation at the world's treatment of her. But as Caleb carefully examined her, checking her tiny limbs, feeling her skull, watching the way she moved, he couldn't find anything obviously wrong. A few scratches, maybe some bruising that would show up later, but nothing broken, nothing bleeding. "She's perfect," he said, and this time it wasn't a lie. "She's going to be fine." Eliza dissolved into tears, pulling Rose back to her chest and rocking her gently. "Thank you," she sobbed. Thank you. When the tree came down, I thought we were going to die. I couldn't get out, couldn't move, and Rose was crying, and I couldn't. Hey. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder, keeping his voice calm and steady. You did fine. You kept her safe until I could get there. That's what matters. My husband, Eliza said suddenly, her head jerking up. James, he was supposed to be back yesterday. He went to town 3 days ago. When the storm hit last night and the tree came down, I kept thinking he'd come back, that he'd hear me screaming, but she trailed off, and Caleb saw the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just fear for herself or Rose. It was the fear of a woman who knew, deep in her bones, that something was very wrong. What town? Caleb asked. Helena. He said he had business there, gambling debts to collect from a man who owed him. He said it would be quick, that he'd be back by Sunday at the latest. Eliza's voice dropped to almost a whisper. It's Tuesday. Caleb didn't say what he was thinking. Men who went to Helena to collect gambling debts often didn't come back at all, or if they did, it wasn't in condition to help anybody. Helena was rough, a mining town that had grown too fast and attracted every drifter, con man, and hard case in the territory. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear into a card game or a fight and never surface again. We'll find him, Caleb said, though he had no idea if that was true. But right now, we need to get you both to safety. That leg needs setting and you need rest and food. How far is the nearest neighbor? The Johnsons, maybe 3 miles north. Eliza winced as she tried to shift her leg. But they might not be there. They were talking about moving back east. Mrs. Johnson never took to the territory. All right, then I'm taking you to town. Helena's too far, but there's a smaller place, Elkhorn, about 8 miles west. They've got a doctor, or at least a man who's done enough doctoring to set a broken leg. I can't pay, Eliza said quickly. James took all our money with him. Don't worry about that. Caleb stood and walked to Judge, pulling his bedroll and saddlebags free. Let's get you comfortable first. It's going to be a rough ride, but I'll go as slow as I can. He fashioned a splint from 2 straight branches and strips torn from his extra shirt, binding Eliza's leg as gently as possible. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, but tears streamed down her face. Rose had quieted now, exhausted from crying, and was nursing at Eliza's breast with the single-minded determination of an infant who knew nothing of collapsed cabins or missing fathers. I need to check your cabin, Caleb said once the splint was in place. See if there's anything worth salvaging. Supplies, documents, anything important. Be careful, Eliza said. It's not safe. I'll be quick. Caleb approached the wreckage cautiously. The cabin had completely collapsed now, the walls flattened, the roof caved in, the massive pine tree lying across it all like the final nail in a coffin. But toward what had been the front of the structure, he could see part of the door still standing, and beside it, a small section of wall that hadn't fully collapsed. He picked his way through the debris, moving carefully, testing each step. Inside the shell of the front room, he found a few items worth taking. A cast-iron skillet, a tin of coffee, a leather satchel that contained papers, marriage certificate, land deed, letters. He grabbed a change of clothes for Eliza from what looked like a trunk that had been smashed open, and a few items of baby clothing. In the corner, beneath a fallen shelf, he found a Bible in a small wooden box that rattled when he picked it up. Inside were a few dollars in coins, not much, but something. The rest was unsalvageable, or not worth the risk of staying longer. The whole structure was still settling, still groaning, and Caleb had no desire to be inside when it decided to collapse further. He gathered what he could carry and made his way back to Eliza. Here, he said, handing her the satchel. Your papers, some clothes, a bit of money. Eliza clutched the satchel to her chest, fresh tears welling. Thank you. I thought everything was gone. Not everything? Caleb glanced at Rose, still nursing peacefully. You've got what matters most. He rigged a makeshift travois from branches and rope, padding it with his bedroll and the clothes he'd salvaged. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than trying to hold Eliza in the saddle for 8 miles. He helped her onto it as gently as possible, making sure Rose was secure in her arms, then tied the whole thing to Judge's saddle. The sun was past noon now, heading toward the western peaks. They'd have maybe 5 hours of good light left, enough to reach Elkhorn if they didn't run into trouble. "Ready?" Caleb asked, checking the knots one last time. Eliza nodded, her face pale but determined. "Ready." They set out, heading west across the valley floor. Caleb walked beside Judge, one hand on the lead rope, the other ready to steady the travois if the terrain got too rough. Behind him, Eliza lay silent except for the occasional gasp of pain when the travois hit a bump. Rose slept, mercifully oblivious to everything that had happened. The landscape rolled past, grass and wildflowers, stands of pine and aspen, the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. Beautiful country, Caleb thought again, and deadly. It didn't matter how tough you were or how hard you worked. The territory had its own rules, and it enforced them without mercy. A storm could roll in without warning, a tree could fall, a husband could disappear. "Caleb?" He turned to look back at Eliza. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "How did you find us? We're so far from anything." "I was checking fence lines for the Garrett Ranch. Heard you screaming." It sounded simple when he said it like that, but they both knew the truth. If he'd been a quarter-mile farther away, if the wind had been blowing from a different direction, if he'd decided to check a different section of fence. "I don't believe in luck," Liza said quietly, "or coincidence. You were meant to be there." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He'd never been much for talk of fate or providence. He'd seen too many good people die and too many bad ones prosper to believe the universe cared one way or another. But he'd learned not to argue with people about their beliefs, especially when those beliefs were all they had to hold on to. "Maybe," he said simply. "Either way, I'm glad I was there." They walked in silence for a while. The sun beat down, warm but not yet hot. Spring this far north was a fleeting thing, a brief window between the killing cold of winter and the blazing heat of summer. Caleb had always liked it best this way, everything new and green, the world feeling full of possibility. "What about you?" Eliza asked after a while. "Do you have family? A wife?" "No, ma'am. Just me." "By choice?" Caleb considered that. "Not really. Just how things worked out. I had family once, parents, a sister. They're all gone now, and I guess I never stayed in one place long enough to build anything new." "Why not?" "Didn't seem like something I was meant for. Some men are built for settling down, putting down roots. Others are built for moving." He paused, then added, "I always figured I was the latter." "You don't sound convinced." Caleb smiled despite himself. "You're perceptive, ma'am." "Eliza, please, you pulled me out of a collapsed cabin. I think we're past formalities." "All right, Eliza, and you're right. I'm not convinced. Truth is, I'm not sure what I'm built for anymore. Thought I knew once, but that was a long time ago." They crested a rise, and in the distance, Caleb could see smoke rising from chimneys. Elkhorn. The town was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a main street, but it was civilization, such as it was. There'd be a doctor there, or someone who could pass for one. Food. A place for Eliza to rest. "Almost there," he said, picking up the pace slightly. Behind him, Rose began to cry again, a thin wail that spoke of hunger and discomfort. Eliza murmured to her, soft words Caleb couldn't quite make out, but that seemed to soothe the baby nonetheless. Mother sounds, Caleb thought. The same sounds his own mother had made when he was small and the world was too big and frightening. Universal words that transcended language. "Everything's all right. I'm here. You're safe." Except Eliza wasn't safe. Not really. She had no husband. Caleb was almost certain of that now, though he didn't have the heart to say it. No home, no money to speak of. Just a baby girl and whatever strength remained in her after today's ordeal. That wasn't much to build a life on, not out here. But people had built on less. Caleb had seen it. Hell, he'd lived it. After the war, he'd had nothing but the clothes on his back and a war surplus rifle. He'd made his way west with nothing but grit and a refusal to quit. If he could do it, maybe Eliza could too. They reached the outskirts of Elkhorn as the sun was touching the western peaks, painting everything in gold and amber. A few people stopped to stare as Caleb led his strange procession down the main street. A cowboy covered in dust and blood, leading a horse pulling a travois with a battered woman and a crying baby. Word would spread fast. By tomorrow morning, everyone in town would know something had happened, and they'd all have their own theories about what. Caleb headed straight for the building with Dr. Samuel Winters painted on the sign. It was a small structure, more cabin than office, but there was smoke coming from the chimney and a light in the window. Someone was home. He tied Judge to the hitching post and moved to Eliza's side. "We're here. Let me help you." "I can walk," she said, but when she tried to stand, her leg buckled and she would have fallen if Caleb hadn't caught her. "Pride's good," he said, lifting her gently, "but sometimes accepting help is better." He carried her up the steps and kicked the door open without bothering to knock. Inside, an old man with wild white hair and spectacles looked up from a book, startled. "I've got a woman with a broken leg," Caleb said without preamble, "and a baby who needs checking over. They were trapped in a collapsed cabin." Dr. Winters didn't waste time with questions. He was on his feet immediately, clearing a table and gesturing for Caleb to set Eliza down. "How long ago?" 2, maybe 3 hours. "Any bleeding? Loss of consciousness?" "Cut on her head, but it stopped bleeding. No loss of consciousness that I know of." Caleb looked to Eliza for confirmation. "I was awake the whole time," she said. "Just trapped. My leg. Let me see." Dr. Winters moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd set hundreds of broken bones. He cut away the makeshift splint Caleb had applied and examined the leg carefully, his fingers probing and pressing while Eliza gasped and bit her lip. "Clean break, both tibia and fibula. You're lucky. Could have been much worse. I'll need to set it properly, and it's going to hurt. Do you want whiskey?" "No." Eliza clutched Rose tighter. "I need to stay clear-headed for her." "Brave woman." Dr. Winters looked at Caleb. "I'll need your help. Hold her shoulders. Keep her still." What followed was brutal. Dr. Winters pulled and manipulated Eliza's leg, working the bones back into alignment while she screamed through clenched teeth. Caleb held her shoulders, murmuring useless words of encouragement, feeling absolutely helpless. Rose wailed in sympathy, and the whole scene felt like something out of a nightmare. But finally, mercifully, it was done. Dr. Winters applied a proper splint, wrapping it tight with bandages, and stepped back, wiping his hands on his apron. "That's the best I can do. Keep weight off it for at least 6 weeks, longer if possible. If it heals crooked, you'll walk with a limp the rest of your life." He turned his attention to Rose, gently examining the baby while Eliza watched with hollow eyes. "Baby seems fine. Few scratches, nothing serious. She's tough, like her mother." "Thank you," Eliza whispered. "Don't thank me yet. You're going to need somewhere to stay while that heals. Do you have family in town?" Eliza shook her head. "No. My husband, he's in Helena. Or he was supposed to be. He hasn't come back." Dr. Winters and Caleb exchanged a look. They both knew what that likely meant. "I'll see about finding you a room at the boarding house," Dr. Winters said. "Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is a good soul. I can't pay," Eliza said quietly. "I don't have anything. We'll work something out." Dr. Winters glanced at Caleb. "You staying in town?" "Wasn't planning on it. Might want to reconsider. This young lady's going to need help, at least for the first few days. And there's the question of her husband. Someone should ride to Helena, see if they can find out what happened to him." Caleb knew he should say no. He'd done his part. He'd pulled Eliza and Rose out of that cabin, gotten them to safety, made sure they had medical attention. His obligation was fulfilled. He could ride back to the Garrett Ranch, collect his pay, and move on to the next job. That was how he lived, how he'd always lived. Get in, do the work, get out. Don't put down roots, don't get attached. But when he looked at Eliza lying on that table, exhausted and injured, holding her baby and trying so hard to be brave, he couldn't make himself say it. "I'll stay a few days," he heard himself say. "Make sure they're settled. Then I'll ride to Helena, see what I can find out about her husband." Relief flooded Eliza's face. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Don't worry about that." Caleb turned to Dr. Winters. "The boarding house. Can you take me there?" "Of course. Let me help you carry her." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from blankets and carried Eliza the 2 blocks to the boarding house, a 2-story building that had seen better days but looked sturdy enough. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, took one look at the situation, and immediately began barking orders in a mixture of English and Cantonese. Within minutes, Eliza was installed in a ground-floor room, Rose was sleeping in a drawer that had been converted to a bassinet, and hot soup was being prepared in the kitchen. "She stay as long as she need," Mrs. Chen announced, fixing Caleb with a stern look. "You pay what you can, when you can. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Caleb pulled out the coins he'd found in Eliza's cabin and added a few of his own. "This is all we have for now." Mrs. Chen counted the money quickly and nodded. "Is enough for 1 week. After that, we figure something out. Girl is strong. She work when leg is better." Caleb stayed until Eliza had eaten some soup and fallen into an exhausted sleep, Rose curled against her side. Then he quietly let himself out, suddenly aware of how tired he was. His body ached in a dozen places, and his hands were torn and bloody from digging through the wreckage. He needed food, a bath, and about 12 hours of sleep. But first he needed to send word to the Garrett Ranch that he wouldn't be back for a while. He found the telegraph office still open and sent a brief message explaining the situation. Old man Garrett was a hard man but fair. He'd understand, or at least not dock Caleb's pay too badly for abandoning his post. That done, Caleb headed back to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen showed him to a small room on the second floor, and he collapsed onto the bed without bothering to remove his boots. Through the thin walls, he could hear Rose crying softly, then Eliza's low voice soothing her, singing something he couldn't quite make out. He closed his eyes, and the last thing he thought before sleep took him was that he'd made a mistake. Not in helping Eliza, that was the only thing he could have done, but in staying, in getting involved, in letting himself care what happened to a woman and baby he'd known for less than a day. Out here, caring was dangerous. Caring got you hurt. Caring made you vulnerable in a world that preyed on vulnerability. But even knowing that, even understanding the risk, Caleb couldn't bring himself to regret it. Sometimes a man just had to trust his gut, even when his gut was leading him into trouble. Caleb woke to the sound of voices drifting through the floorboards, women's voices, speaking in hushed tones that carried the weight of gossip and speculation. He lay still for a moment, letting his body catalog its various complaints. His back was stiff, his hands throbbed where splinters had gouged deep, and his shoulders felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. The price of yesterday's heroics, he thought wryly. He'd felt worse after breaking horses or driving cattle through a blizzard, but not by much. The light coming through the thin curtains told him it was early morning, maybe an hour past dawn. He'd slept hard, the kind of dreamless sleep that came from complete exhaustion. Now his body was demanding food and coffee, in that order. He swung his legs off the bed and stood, working the kinks out of his back. His clothes were filthy, crusted with dried blood and dust from the collapsed cabin. He'd need to do something about that. But first, coffee. Always coffee. Always. Downstairs, the boarding house dining room was already occupied. 3 women sat around a table, teacups in hand, their conversation dying the moment Caleb appeared. He recognized Mrs. Chen, but the other 2 were strangers. One older, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the other younger, perhaps 35, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. "Good morning," Caleb said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Turner." Mrs. Chen was already moving toward the kitchen. "You sit. I bring food." Just coffee would be, "You sit. You need food. You eat." Caleb knew better than to argue with a woman who spoke with that much certainty. He took a seat at an empty table, acutely aware of the 3 pairs of eyes studying him. The older woman looked disapproving, the younger one curious, and Mrs. Chen was simply efficient as always. "That was quite the entrance yesterday," the younger woman said, breaking the awkward silence. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I run the general store down the street. This is Mrs. Prudence Harrington. She's involved in most things around town." "Concerned citizen," Mrs. Harrington corrected, her voice crisp. "And yes, Mr. Turner, the whole town is talking about your rescue. Very dramatic, though I must say I have questions about the circumstances." "I'm sure you do." Caleb accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Chen brought him with a nod of thanks. "Not sure I have many answers." "The young woman, Mrs. Monroe, I'm told. Where is her husband? It seems odd that she was alone in that cabin with a baby in her condition." There it was, The thing Caleb had known would come up, the judgment that frontier towns specialized in. A woman alone was suspicious. A woman with a child and no man to account for was practically scandalous. Her husband went to Helena on business, Caleb said carefully. He was supposed to return days ago. I see. Mrs. Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. And you, Mr. Turner? What were you doing out there? The Garrett Ranch is miles from where that cabin stood. Checking fence lines. Heard her screaming. Went to help. Caleb kept his voice level, refusing to be baited. Seemed like the thing to do. Of course it was, Sarah Mitchell interjected, shooting Mrs. Harrington a look. You did a brave thing, Mr. Turner. Most men would have ridden for help rather than digging through that wreckage themselves. Didn't seem to be time for that. Mrs. Chen returned with a plate piled with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. You eat now. Need strength. Today you go to Helena, yes? Find the husband? Caleb had forgotten he'd mentioned that plan last night. That was the idea, but I should probably check on Mrs. Monroe first. Make sure she sleeps still, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Baby, keep her up all night. You let her rest. You eat, then you go. Find answers is better. She was right, of course. Sitting around Elkhorn wasn't going to accomplish anything, and the sooner they knew what had happened to James Monroe, the sooner Eliza could start making plans for whatever came next. Still, something about leaving her here, injured and vulnerable, made Caleb uneasy. Mrs. Chen and I will look after her, Sarah offered, as if reading his thoughts. She won't be alone. And I will speak with Reverend Patterson about organizing some assistance, Mrs. Harrington added, though her tone suggested this was more obligation than enthusiasm. Even if the circumstances are irregular, a woman with a child deserves Christian charity. Caleb bit back his first response and focused on eating. The food was good, simple, but filling, and he realized he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. His body needed fuel if he was going to spend the day riding to Helena and back. He was finishing his second cup of coffee when he heard the creak of floorboards overhead, followed by Rose's crying. The sound had a different quality this morning. Less terror, more ordinary infant complaint. Hungry, probably, or needing a change. The sounds of life continuing despite yesterday's catastrophe. I'll check on her, Sarah said, rising from her chair. See if she needs anything. Mrs. Harrington stood as well, gathering her shawl. I have matters to attend to. Mr. Turner, I trust you'll exercise discretion in Helena. Small towns talk, and we wouldn't want any unfortunate rumors to follow Mrs. Monroe. No, ma'am, Caleb said, though he had no idea what discretion she was referring to. The truth was the truth, whatever it turned out to be. After both women had left, Mrs. Chen sat down across from Caleb with her own cup of tea. That one, she said, jerking her head toward the door Mrs. Harrington had exited through. She has big mouth but small heart. You ignore her. The other one, Sarah, she is good woman. She help. And you? Caleb asked with a slight smile. I run business, but I also know what it is to be woman alone in hard place. So I help too, when I can. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. This Mrs. Monroe, she has strength. I see it in her eyes. She survived this, I think. I hope you're right. Hope is good, but strength is better. Mrs. Chen stood, collecting Caleb's empty plate. You go to Helena now. Find truth. Truth is hard sometimes, but not knowing is harder. Caleb couldn't argue with that. He finished his coffee, paid Mrs. Chen for the meal, and headed upstairs to collect his gear. As he passed Eliza's room, he paused, hearing voices inside. Sarah's gentle tones and Eliza's softer responses, punctuated by Rose's intermittent fussing. He almost knocked, almost went in to say goodbye, but something stopped him. Eliza needed rest and peace, not another complication. He'd be back by evening with answers. That would have to be enough. Judge was waiting at the hitching post where Caleb had left him, patient as always. Caleb checked the horse's hooves, tightened the cinch, and swung into the saddle. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made a man glad to be alive and moving. The ride to Helena would take most of the day at a steady pace, maybe 8 hours if he pushed it, 10 if he didn't. He decided not to push. Judge had already done hard work yesterday, and there was no point in wearing them both out. The trail west was well traveled, marked by wagon ruts and the occasional pile of horse droppings. Caleb let Judge set his own pace, keeping his eyes on the surrounding country. This was still wild land, despite the increase in settlers. Wolves hunted here, and the occasional grizzly. A man alone needed to stay alert. His mind drifted as he rode, replaying yesterday's events, the sound of Eliza's screams echoing across the valley, the sight of that collapsed cabin, the desperate scramble to free her and Rose before the whole structure came down. He'd been in plenty of dangerous situations before. The war had seen to that, and ranch work had its own hazards. But something about yesterday had felt different, more immediate somehow, more personal. Maybe it was because Eliza had looked at him with such desperate hope. Or maybe it was because Rose was so tiny, so fragile, so completely dependent on the adults around her keeping their heads and doing what needed to be done. Whatever the reason, Caleb knew he'd remember yesterday for the rest of his life. Some moments branded themselves into your memory whether you wanted them to or not. The sun climbed higher as he rode, warming his back through his shirt. He passed a few other travelers, a family in a wagon heading east, a pair of prospectors leading pack mules, a circuit preacher on a tired-looking mare. Each exchange was brief, just a nod or a word of greeting. The code of the trail. Acknowledge, but don't intrude. It was past noon when Caleb stopped to rest Judge and eat some jerky he'd bought from Mrs. Chen that morning. He found a spot near a creek where the horse could drink and graze while Caleb stretched his legs and let his mind work through what he might find in Helena. Best case, James Monroe was alive and well, just delayed by business or bad weather. He'd been planning to return any day now and would be shocked and grateful to learn his wife and daughter had survived the cabin collapse. They'd reunite, rebuild, and Caleb would ride away knowing he'd done a good thing. Worst case, James Monroe was dead, killed in a gambling dispute or accident, and Eliza was now a widow with an infant, no home, no money, and a broken leg that would keep her from working for weeks. In that scenario, Caleb wasn't sure what would happen. The territory wasn't kind to women in Eliza's position. She'd need help, and he wasn't sure how much he could or should provide. There was also the middle ground. Monroe was alive but had abandoned his family, skipped town with his gambling winnings, or run from debts. That might actually be worse than him being dead. At least death offered certainty and, eventually, the possibility of moving forward. Abandonment just left questions that could haunt a person forever. Caleb shook his head, annoyed at himself for spinning scenarios. He'd find out the truth soon enough. No point in borrowing trouble. He remounted Judge and continued west. The landscape gradually changed as he rode, becoming more developed. He passed several established ranches, their fences neat and maintained, cattle grazing in organized patterns. Signs of civilization creeping outward from Helena, taming the wild country 1 acre at a time. Caleb wasn't sure how he felt about that. Part of him appreciated the order, the evidence that people were building something lasting. But another part mourned the loss of the open range, the sense that a man could ride for days and never see another soul. Helena appeared in the late afternoon, sprawled across a valley like a wound that wouldn't heal. The town had exploded in the last decade, growing from a small mining camp into a bustling territorial capital. Buildings crowded together in chaotic patterns, some new and some already showing signs of age despite being only a few years old. The streets were busy with wagons, horses, and people moving with the purposeful chaos of a place that ran on gold and ambition. Caleb guided Judge down the main street, taking in the saloons, gambling halls, mercantiles, and assay offices. Every third building seemed to be either selling liquor or offering ways to lose money. The kind of place that attracted men looking to strike it rich and usually ending up striking nothing but bottom. He needed to find out what had happened to James Monroe. But where to start? The sheriff's office seemed like the obvious choice. If Monroe had gotten into trouble, legal or otherwise, the law might know something about it. The sheriff's office was located in a sturdy brick building near the center of town. Caleb tied Judge to the rail outside and pushed through the door. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk, boots propped up, reading a week-old newspaper. "Help you?" The deputy was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that hadn't yet been weathered by the territory's harsh realities. Looking for information about a man named James Monroe. He came to Helena about a week ago, supposed to collect on a gambling debt. Never made it home. The deputy's expression shifted from bored to interested. Monroe, you said? James Monroe? That's right. You know him? Know of him. Hold on. The deputy stood and disappeared through a door into a back room. Caleb heard low voices, then footsteps. A moment later, an older man emerged, mid-50s, with gray streaking his dark hair and the kind of eyes that had seen everything twice. I'm Sheriff Coleman. You asking about James Monroe? Yes, sir. His wife and baby daughter were caught in a cabin collapse yesterday. I pulled them out, got them to safety in Elkhorn. Mrs. Monroe said her husband was supposed to return from Helena days ago. She's worried. Sheriff Coleman's expression was grim. She should be. James Monroe is dead. Been dead for 5 days now. The words hit Caleb like a fist, even though he'd been half expecting them. How? Knife fight in a gambling den called the Lucky Star. Dispute over cards, from what witnesses said. Monroe accused another man of cheating. The other man took exception. Things escalated. Coleman pulled a file from his desk and flipped it open. We arrested the other man, fellow named Dixon Carter, but he claimed self-defense. Said Monroe drew first. Had enough witnesses to back his story that we couldn't make murder charges stick. He's in jail on manslaughter, but he'll probably be out in a year, maybe less. And Monroe? Buried in the town cemetery. Pauper's grave. He had some money on him when he died, but it went to pay off debts he'd run up at various establishments around town. Turned out he didn't come here to collect a gambling debt. He came here to try to win back money he'd already lost. Bad decision. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. So Monroe had lied to his wife, left her alone with a baby while he chased lost money in gambling dens and gotten himself killed in the process. And Eliza had been sitting in that cabin waiting for a man who was never coming back, right up until the tree fell and nearly killed her. His wife doesn't know, Caleb said quietly. I figured. We didn't have any information about next of kin. Monroe didn't carry any identification beyond his name, and nobody here knew where he'd come from. Coleman studied Caleb with sharp eyes. You planning to tell her? I am now. It won't be easy. From what I heard, Monroe talked about his wife sometimes when he was drinking. Seemed to feel guilty about something, though he never said what. Maybe it was leaving her alone. Maybe it was the gambling. Hard to say with men like that. Men like what? Drifters, dreamers, the kind who are always looking for the next big score, the lucky hand that'll change everything. They usually end up dead or drunk or both. Coleman closed the file. You want to see the grave? Pay your respects or whatever? Caleb shook his head. I never met the man, and I'm not sure respect is what I'm feeling right now. Fair enough. For what it's worth, you did a good thing, pulling his wife and kid out of that cabin. Not many men would have taken the risk. Anyone would have done the same. You'd be surprised. Coleman walked Caleb to the door. If Mrs. Monroe needs anything, legal documents, death certificate, anything like that, tell her to write to me. I'll do what I can. I'll tell her. Thank you, Sheriff. Caleb stepped back into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling the weight of what he'd learned settling over him like a heavy coat. James Monroe was dead, killed by his own poor decisions and worse judgment. Eliza was a widow, whether she knew it yet or not, and Rose would grow up never knowing her father, only the stories people told about him, and Caleb suspected those stories wouldn't be kind. He should head back to Elkhorn immediately, get there before full dark. But something made him walk down the street toward the Lucky Star gambling den. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Answers, maybe. Or just a sense of the place where James Monroe's life had ended. The Lucky Star was exactly what Caleb expected, a long, narrow building with a bar down one side and gaming tables filling the rest of the space. Even in late afternoon, it was doing steady business. Men hunched over cards, their faces tight with concentration or loose with whiskey. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies and spilled liquor. Caleb ordered a whiskey and nursed it at the bar, watching the room. After a few minutes, the bartender, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, wandered over. You look like a man with something on his mind. Maybe. I'm trying to understand what happened to a man named James Monroe. He died here about 5 days ago. The bartender's expression clouded. Yeah, I remember that night. Bad business. Monroe was a regular for about 3 days before it happened. Played poker mostly, lost more than he won. The night he died, he was drinking heavy, playing reckless. Then he accused Dixon Carter of dealing from the bottom of the deck. Was Carter cheating? Probably. Most of them do if they think they can get away with it. But you don't accuse a man like Carter without proof. And you definitely don't do it when you're drunk and he's sober. Monroe grabbed Carter's arm, tried to look at the cards. Carter shoved him back. Monroe went for his knife. Carter was faster. The bartender shrugged. Like I told the sheriff, it was stupid all around. Monroe should have walked away. Why didn't he? Why do any of them stay when they're losing? Pride, maybe, or desperation. Monroe kept talking about how he needed to win back what he'd lost, how his wife would kill him if he came home empty-handed. Guess he figured dying here was better than facing her. Caleb set his glass down, the whiskey suddenly tasting bitter. He had a wife and baby daughter waiting for him. Yeah, he mentioned them. Showed me a picture once. Pretty woman, cute baby. He seemed to love them in his way, just loved gambling more. The bartender leaned in closer. You a friend of his? No, I'm the man who pulled his wife and daughter out of a collapsed cabin yesterday. Now I've got to go back and tell her she's a widow. The bartender winced. That's rough. You need another drink? On the house? No, I need to ride. Caleb pushed away from the bar. Thanks for the information. He walked back to where Judge waited, still patient, still steady. Caleb ran a hand down the horse's neck, gathering his thoughts. The ride back to Elkhorn would take hours, and every one of them would be spent dreading the conversation he'd have to have with Eliza. How did you tell a woman that her husband was dead? That he died chasing foolish dreams in a gambling den while she waited for him at home? That the money he'd claimed to be collecting was actually money he'd already lost? There was no good way, no gentle way, just the truth, delivered as kindly as possible, and then whatever came after. Caleb swung into the saddle and turned Judge back toward Elkhorn. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, in the way that frontier sunsets always were. Beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. The ride back passed in a blur of thought and planning. Caleb tried to work out what he'd say to Eliza, how he'd break the news. Every version he came up with sounded clumsy or cruel or both. Finally, he gave up trying to script it. He'd tell her the truth straight, answer her questions, and offer what comfort he could. That was all any man could do. It was full dark by the time Elkhorn came into view, lit by scattered lanterns in windows. Caleb rode straight to the boarding house, his body aching from the long day in the saddle. Mrs. Chen met him at the door, her face worried. She is awake, Mrs. Chen said quietly. She has been asking about you all day. Asking if you found her husband. I found him, or found out what happened to him anyway. Caleb removed his hat, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. Is she strong enough to hear bad news? Mrs. Chen's expression tightened. She is strong enough, but that does not mean it will not hurt. No, it won't. Caleb moved toward the stairs, then paused. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for taking care of her. Is what we do. Take care of each other. Otherwise, what is the point? Caleb climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. At Eliza's door, he stopped and listened. He could hear Rose fussing softly inside, and Eliza's voice murmuring to her. He knocked gently. Come in. Eliza was propped up in bed, pillows supporting her back, Rose cradled in her arms. She looked better than she had yesterday. Cleaner, her hair brushed, the cut on her forehead bandaged properly. But her eyes were anxious, searching his face for answers the moment he entered. You found him, she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down heavily. I did. Eliza, I'm sorry. James is dead. He watched the color drain from her face, watched her arms tighten protectively around Rose. For a long moment, she didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared at him with wide eyes that held something complicated. Grief, yes, but also something else. something that might have been relief, though Caleb couldn't be sure. How? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Knife fight in a gambling den, 5 days ago. He got into a dispute over cards, accused another man of cheating. Things escalated. He wasn't collecting a debt. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. No, according to the sheriff, he was trying to win back money he'd already lost. Eliza closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. I knew, she whispered. I didn't know he was dead, but I knew he was lying about collecting a debt. James didn't gamble smart. He chased losses. Every time he went to town, he came back with less than he left with. And every time he had a story about how the next time would be different. I'm sorry. Are you? Eliza opened her eyes, looking at him directly. You didn't know him. You don't need to be sorry for my sake. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry Rose lost her father. I'm sorry you're in this position. Don't be sorry for that last part. Eliza's voice was stronger now, though still rough with tears. I've been in this position since the day I married James. He was charming and handsome and full of big plans, but he was never really there, not in the ways that mattered. I've been alone for a long time. Now it's just official. Rose began to cry in earnest, and Eliza automatically adjusted her hold, beginning to rock gently. The motion seemed to calm them both. What happens now? Caleb asked. I don't know. Eliza looked down at Rose. I have no home, no money, a leg that won't work for weeks, a baby to feed and care for. I should be terrified. She paused, then added quietly, and I am, but I'm also relieved. Is that terrible? No. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's honest. James was my husband, and part of me loved him, but another part of me has been so tired of waiting, tired of hoping he'd change, tired of being disappointed. She wiped at her tears with one hand, and now I don't have to wait anymore. I don't have to hope. I can just do what needs to be done. Which is what? Survive. Rebuild. Make a life for Rose that's better than the one I had with James. Eliza looked at Caleb, her green eyes clear despite the tears. I'm not helpless, Mr. Turner. I'm educated. I can read and write and do figures. I can teach or keep books or a dozen other things. Once my leg heals, I'll find work. I'll find a way. I believe you. And Caleb did. There was steel in Eliza Monroe, hidden beneath the pretty face and quiet voice, the kind of steel that let a woman shield her baby with her own body while a cabin collapsed around them, the kind that would let her build a new life from the rubble of the old one. But I'll need help, Eliza continued. At least at first, I'll need... She stopped, her expression suddenly cautious. I don't want charity. I'll pay back every cent somehow, but I'll need time and help to get on my feet. You'll have both. The words came out before Caleb fully thought them through, but once said, he didn't want to take them back. Mrs. Chen's already said you can stay here, work off the cost of the room once your leg heals, and I'll help with whatever else you need. Why? Eliza's question was direct, almost challenging. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you help? Caleb considered the question. Why was he helping? Guilt over James Monroe's death, even though he'd had nothing to do with it? Pity for Eliza's situation? Simple decency? Maybe all of those things, or maybe something simpler. Because I can, he said finally. Because you need it, and because... He hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I think you're strong enough to build something good here, and I'd like to see that happen. Eliza held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you. I won't waste your faith in me. I know. Rose had fallen asleep against Eliza's chest, her tiny face peaceful. Eliza looked down at her daughter, and her expression softened into something fierce and protective. She's going to have a better life, Eliza said quietly. I'm going to make sure of it. She's going to grow up knowing she can depend on me, that I won't leave her or disappoint her or put cards and whiskey ahead of her needs. Her voice caught. She's going to have the father I should have given her, even if that means I have to be both mother and father. She's lucky to have you. We'll see. Eliza yawned suddenly, exhaustion catching up with her. I'm sorry. I'm so tired. Rest. We can talk more tomorrow. Caleb stood, settling his hat back on his head. If you need anything during the night, Mrs. Chen's room is just down the hall, and I'm upstairs. Mr. Turner? Eliza called as he reached the door. He turned back. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. For pulling us out of that cabin, for writing to Helena, for telling me the truth about James, for offering to help. Just thank you. You're welcome. Caleb left the room and climbed the stairs to his own, his mind full of everything that had happened in the last 2 days. 2 days ago, he'd been a solitary cowboy, checking fence lines and thinking about nothing more complicated than where he'd drift to next. Now he was entangled in the life of a widow and her infant daughter, committed to helping them rebuild in ways he didn't fully understand. He should leave, should collect his pay from the Garrett Ranch, move on to the next job, let Eliza handle her own problems. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that kept him from getting too attached to people and places. But as Caleb lay down on his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night, he knew he wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Sometimes a man stumbled into purpose without looking for it, and sometimes that purpose looked like a green-eyed woman with a broken leg and an iron will, determined to build something good out of the wreckage of her life. Caleb closed his eyes and let sleep take him, his last conscious thought that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new ways for him to prove that staying had been the right choice after all. Morning came too soon, dragging Caleb from dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him feeling unsettled. He dressed slowly, his muscles protesting every movement. The work of the past 2 days had taken more out of him than he'd realized, but there was no time for recuperation. Eliza would need help navigating the practical realities of widowhood, and Caleb had appointed himself the man to provide it. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was already moving through the dining room with her characteristic efficiency, setting out plates and cups for the boarders who were beginning to filter in for breakfast. She caught Caleb's eye and gestured toward the kitchen with a tilt of her head. Coffee ready, and I make extra eggs. You need strength today. What makes you think today's going to be harder than yesterday? Mrs. Chen gave him a look that suggested the question was beneath him. Yesterday you dig woman from collapsed house and ride to find dead husband. Today you help her figure out how to live. Which you think is harder? Caleb had to concede the point. He accepted the coffee gratefully and was working through his second cup when Sarah Mitchell arrived, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. I brought some things for Mrs. Monroe, Sarah said, setting the basket on a nearby table. Baby clothes mostly. My sister's children outgrew them, and she sent them to me thinking I might have use for them someday. Better they go to someone who needs them now. She paused, her expression sympathetic. Mrs. Chen told me about Mr. Monroe. That poor woman. First the cabin, now this. She's stronger than she looks, Caleb said. She'll need to be. Sarah pulled back the cloth to reveal not just baby clothes, but also fabric, thread, and what looked like a simple dress. I took the liberty of guessing her size. She can't wear that torn dress forever, and I imagine most of her belongings were lost in the collapse. That's kind of you. It's practical. Kindness and practicality aren't mutually exclusive, Mr. Turner. Sarah refolded the cloth over the basket. I also spoke with Mr. Henderson at the schoolhouse. He mentioned they've been looking for someone to help with the younger children, teaching basic letters and numbers. It doesn't pay much, but it's respectable work, and the hours would allow her to keep Rose with her. Caleb felt a surge of gratitude for this woman he barely knew. She'll appreciate that, once her leg heals enough. Of course. I told Mr. Henderson it would be a few weeks at least. Sarah hesitated, then added, There's talk around town, you know, about you and Mrs. Monroe. Already? It's been less than 2 days. This is Elkhorn, Mr. Turner. 2 days is an eternity in small-town gossip. Sarah's tone was matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. Most of it is harmless speculation, people wondering about your intentions, whether you'll stay, that sort of thing. But Mrs. Harrington has been making noises about propriety and appearances. Let me guess. She thinks it's inappropriate for me to be involved. She thinks everything is inappropriate unless she's approved it first. Ignore her. The rest of the town sees what you did. You saved a woman and child from certain death. That counts for something. Sarah picked up the basket. I'll take this up to Mrs. Monroe if you'd like. Give you a chance to finish your breakfast. Thank you. Tell her I'll be up shortly to discuss some practical matters. After Sarah left, Caleb forced himself to eat the eggs Mrs. Chen had prepared, though his appetite was minimal. His mind was already running through everything that needed to be handled. Death certificates, legal documents, the question of Eliza's property, what remained of it anyway, her husband's debts, if any, the future she'd have to build from whatever pieces were left. He was contemplating his third cup of coffee when he heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Eliza herself, moving slowly with the aid of a crutch that someone, probably Dr. Winters, had provided. Her face was pale with effort, and her splinted leg hung awkwardly, but her expression was determined. "You shouldn't be up," Caleb said, rising quickly. "I'm tired of lying in bed feeling helpless." Eliza made it to a chair and lowered herself carefully, breathing hard from the exertion. "Besides, if we're going to discuss my future, I should be present for it." Mrs. Chen appeared with a cup of tea and a plate of food, setting them in front of Eliza without comment. Eliza accepted them with a grateful nod and took a careful sip of the tea before speaking again. "Sarah told me about the teaching position. That was thoughtful of her to arrange. She seems like a good woman. Better than I deserve, considering I'm a stranger here." Eliza set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been thinking all night about what you said, about rebuilding, and I've made some decisions." "I'm listening." "First, I need to know exactly what my situation is. You said James had debts in Helena. How much? And what about the property where the cabin stood? Is it even mine, or did James lose it gambling?" Caleb appreciated her directness. "Sheriff Coleman said James's debts in Helena were paid from the money he had on him when he died. As for the property, I have the deed from your cabin. It's in your name, not his, so at least you have that. Land with a destroyed cabin on it. Wonderful." Eliza's tone was dry, but not bitter. "Still, it's something. Land can be sold or rebuilt on if I can ever afford to do that. There's also the question of his body. Sheriff Coleman said he'd help with documentation if you need it, but Monroe's already buried in Helena, Pauper's grave." Eliza was quiet for a moment, staring at her tea. "I should feel something about that. Sadness, maybe, or anger that he ended up in such a place. But mostly, I just feel numb. Is that wrong? There's no wrong way to feel. Everyone keeps saying that, but I'm not sure I believe it." She looked up at him, her green eyes searching. "You must think I'm cold. My husband's dead less than a week, and here I sit making plans like he never existed. I think you're a survivor. There's a difference between being cold and being practical." "Maybe." Eliza took a bite of eggs, chewing slowly. "Sarah also mentioned there's been talk about you and me. Small towns talk. It doesn't mean anything." "It means something to me." Eliza set down her fork. "I won't have people thinking poorly of you because you helped me, and I won't have them thinking I'm some kind of opportunist, latching on to the first man who showed me kindness. Anyone who thinks that doesn't know you." "They don't know me at all. That's the problem." Eliza's voice took on a sharp edge. "I'm a stranger here, a woman with a questionable past. At least that's how they'll see it once they know the full story about James. And now I'm accepting help from an unmarried man. Mrs. Harrington has probably already decided I'm a fallen woman." "Mrs. Harrington can—" Caleb stopped himself, editing his language for present company. "Mrs. Harrington's opinion isn't worth worrying about. But the town's opinion is. I need these people, Mr. Turner. I need their goodwill and their business if I'm going to make a life here. I can't afford to have my reputation damaged before I've even established one." Caleb understood what she was saying, even if he didn't like it. Frontier towns operated on reputation and respectability, especially for women. A widow was expected to mourn properly, to be visibly devastated, to retreat from public life for a suitable period. Eliza, with her practical plans and her acceptance of help from an unrelated man, was already pushing against those expectations. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to establish myself as quickly as possible. Take that teaching position as soon as I'm able. Find a permanent place to live, something modest but respectable. Show this town that I'm a woman of character who can support herself and her child." Eliza met his eyes squarely. "And I think that means you should probably keep your distance once the immediate crisis is over." The words hit Caleb harder than he expected. He'd known from the start that his involvement was temporary, that Eliza would need to stand on her own eventually, but he hadn't anticipated it would come so soon, or that it would feel like a door closing. "If that's what you think is best," he said carefully, "it's not about what I want, it's about what's necessary." Eliza's voice softened slightly. "You've been wonderful, Mr. Turner. You saved our lives, and I'll never forget that. But I can't lean on you forever. And more importantly, you shouldn't have to carry my burdens. You have your own life to live." "What if I don't mind carrying them?" The question hung in the air between them, surprising them both. Eliza stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Caleb realized he'd said more than he'd intended, more than he'd even known he was thinking. "You don't know what you're saying," Eliza said finally. "We've known each other for 2 days. 2 extraordinary days, yes, but still just 2 days. You don't know me. You don't know what I'm like when I'm not injured or grieving or in crisis, and I don't know you beyond the fact that you're brave and kind and apparently determined to complicate your life for a woman you barely know. Maybe I want to know you better." "Why?" Eliza's tone wasn't angry, just genuinely confused. "I'm a widow with a baby and no prospects. I'm about to be the subject of small-town gossip. I have nothing to offer you except complications and obligations. Why would you want any part of that?" Caleb didn't have a good answer. Or rather, he had several answers, none of which felt adequate to explain the pull he felt toward this woman. There was admiration for her strength, certainly, sympathy for her situation, a protectiveness that had taken root when he'd pulled her from that collapsed cabin. But beneath all of that was something else, something he couldn't quite name, but that felt important nonetheless. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just do." Eliza studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. The defensiveness faded, replaced by a kind of weary vulnerability. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "Of failing, of not being enough for Rose, of accepting help and then having it pulled away when things get hard, of letting someone else into our lives and having them disappoint us the way James did." She wrapped her hands around her teacup as if drawing warmth from it. "So yes, I think it's better if we keep things simple, professional. You help me get settled, and then you go back to your life. Clean break, no complications." "All right." Caleb nodded, respecting her decision even as something in his chest protested. "But the offer stands. If you change your mind, if you need anything, I'm here." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Mrs. Chen chose that moment to reappear, clearing plates with meaningful looks that suggested she'd heard at least part of the conversation. "Dr. Winters is here," she announced. "Says he wants to check the leg." Eliza shifted in her chair, wincing. "Already? I thought he wasn't coming until tomorrow." "Small town," Mrs. Chen said with a shrug. "Doctor here's widow is walking around on broken leg day after it was set. Doctor comes to scold widow for being stupid." Despite everything, Eliza laughed. It was a short, surprise sound, but genuine. "Fair enough. Send him in." Dr. Winters entered a moment later, carrying his medical bag and wearing an expression of professional disapproval. "Mrs. Monroe, I specifically told you to stay off that leg. You also told me I'd be walking with a limp for the rest of my life if it healed crooked. Seems to me I might as well find out sooner rather than later if I'm going to be an invalid. There's a difference between testing your limits and being reckless." But Dr. Winters was already kneeling beside her chair, carefully examining the splint and probing the swollen flesh around it. "Any increased pain, numbness, discoloration?" "Just the normal amount of feeling like my leg is on fire." "That's to be expected." He sat back on his heels, apparently satisfied. "You're lucky. The bones are holding position, and I don't see signs of infection. But Mrs. Monroe, I cannot stress enough how important it is that you let this heal properly. 6 weeks minimum of limited weight bearing. Use the crutch. Rest when you can. If you push too hard too fast, you risk permanent damage." "I understand, but I also have a 4-month-old daughter who needs care, no money coming in, and a very limited window to establish myself in this town before people decide I'm not worth their goodwill. So forgive me if I'm not willing to spend 6 weeks as an invalid." Dr. Winters looked at Caleb as if seeking support, but Caleb just shrugged. He was learning that when Eliza made up her mind about something, arguing was pointless. At least promise me you'll be careful, Dr. Winters said, turning back to Eliza. And if you notice any increase in pain, any fever, any strange sensations in that leg, you send for me immediately. Understood? Understood. After Dr. Winters left, muttering about stubborn patience, Eliza attempted to stand. Caleb moved to help her, and this time she didn't refuse, accepting his arm as she maneuvered back onto the crutch. I need to see what's left of the cabin, she said once she was steady. See if there's anything else worth salvaging. I already checked. There wasn't much. I need to see it for myself. That was my home, Mr. Turner. Where I lived with my husband, whatever our problems were. Where I brought Rose home after she was born. I need to say goodbye to it properly. Caleb wanted to argue that the journey would be too difficult, that she was in no condition for an 8-mile ride to the collapsed cabin and back, but he recognized the set of her jaw, the determination in her eyes. This wasn't about practicality. It was about closure. We'll take it slow, he said, and if at any point it's too much, we turn back. Agreed? Agreed. They set out an hour later after Eliza had nursed Rose and arranged for Sarah to watch the baby during their absence. Sarah had protested that Eliza shouldn't be making such a journey so soon, but like Caleb, she'd eventually recognized the futility of arguing and simply made Eliza promise to be careful. Judge carried them both, Caleb in the saddle and Eliza seated behind him, her good leg in the stirrup and her injured one held carefully to the side. It was an awkward arrangement, and Caleb could feel the tension in her body as she fought to keep her weight balanced and her injured leg still. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just held onto his waist and endured. The morning was overcast, clouds hanging low and threatening rain. The landscape looked different under that gray light, less welcoming, more austere. Caleb remembered how beautiful it had seemed just 2 days ago when he'd been riding fence lines without a care beyond his next meal. How quickly everything had changed. Tell me about yourself, Eliza said after they'd been riding for an hour. If we're going to be in each other's lives for the next few weeks, I should know more about the man I'm trusting. Not much to tell. I'm from Missouri originally. Parents are dead. Fought in the war, drifted west after, been working ranches mostly, moving from place to place. No wife? Never married? Never seemed like the right time. Or the right person. Caleb was aware of her arms around his waist, the way her body moved with Judge's gait. What about you? How did you end up married to James Monroe? The usual way. I was young and stupid, and he was charming. Eliza's voice held a note of self-mockery. I was 18, working in my father's store in Kansas. James came through town with big plans about Montana territory, free land, opportunities, a fresh start. He painted this picture of what our life would be like, and I believed him. We married 3 weeks after we met. That's fast. It was foolish, but I was desperate to leave Kansas, to escape a life that felt small and suffocating. James offered adventure, and I grabbed onto it without thinking about the consequences. She paused, and Caleb felt her grip tighten slightly. The first year wasn't bad. We built the cabin together, cleared some land, talked about the future. But then James started disappearing for longer and longer periods, and when he came back, there was always less money than there should have been. You never thought about leaving? Where would I go? Back to Kansas and admit I'd made a mistake. That wasn't possible. And then I got pregnant with Rose, and after that, well, you don't leave when there's a child involved. You try to make it work. You hope things will get better. But they didn't. No, they just got quieter. We stopped fighting because we stopped talking about anything that mattered. James would leave, I'd wait, he'd come back, promise to change, and the cycle would start again. Eliza shifted slightly and Caleb heard her sharp intake of breath as her injured leg jarred against something. I'm not glad he's dead, but I'm not devastated either. Mostly, I'm just tired and relieved it's over. They rode in silence for a while after that. The only sounds the steady rhythm of Judge's hooves and the occasional call of a bird. The clouds thickened overhead, and Caleb felt the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. We should turn back, he said. Storm's coming. We're almost there. I can see the ridge. Eliza's voice was firm. I need to do this, Mr. Turner. Please. Caleb didn't argue. He urged Judge forward, and they crested the ridge just as the rain began in earnest. Below them, the valley stretched out green and lush. and there, in the distance, was the collapsed cabin, or what remained of it. From this distance, it looked even worse than Caleb remembered. The massive pine tree lay across the structure like a fallen giant, and the walls had completely collapsed inward. Nothing remained standing except for a few support posts jutting up from the wreckage like broken teeth. Eliza went very still behind him, and Caleb felt her breath catch. "That was my home," she whispered. "How did we survive that?" "Luck, and you being strong enough to hold on until I got there." They descended into the valley, rain falling steadily now, and approached the wreckage. Caleb helped Eliza down from Judge, steadying her as she balanced on her good leg and the crutch. For a long moment, she just stood there staring at the ruins. "I was making bread when the storm hit," she said quietly. "The dough was rising on the table. I'd just finished nursing Rose and had put her down for a nap. I was thinking about what to make for dinner when James got back, even though part of me knew he probably wouldn't be back that day, or the next." She moved closer to the wreckage, navigating carefully through the debris. Then the wind picked up so fast. I heard this terrible cracking sound, and suddenly the tree was falling, and everything was noise and destruction, and I grabbed Rose and tried to cover her. That's all I remember clearly until I heard your voice. Caleb followed her, ready to catch her if she stumbled. The rain was making everything slick and treacherous, but Eliza seemed determined to tour the perimeter of her former life. "There," she said, pointing to a corner of the wreckage where a piece of fabric fluttered in the wind. "That was Rose's blanket, the one my mother made for her. I thought it was lost." Caleb waded into the debris and retrieved the blanket. It was dirty and torn, but recognizable. He brought it back to Eliza, who clutched it to her chest with her free hand. "Thank you." Her voice was thick with emotion. "It's silly to care about a blanket when everything else is gone, but it's not silly. It matters because it mattered to your mother, because it connects Rose to her grandmother." Eliza nodded, blinking back tears that mixed with the rain on her face. She turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the destruction, and Caleb could see her processing it all. The life she'd built, the marriage that had failed, the future that had been buried under timber and broken promises. "I'm not going to rebuild here," she said finally. "I know the land is mine, but I can't come back to this place. Too many ghosts." "Then you'll sell it. Use the money to establish yourself in Elkhorn." "Yes." Eliza straightened her shoulders, visibly gathering her resolve. "That's what I'll do. Sell the land, take the teaching position, find a small house to rent, build something new instead of trying to resurrect something that was broken from the start." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain intensified. Caleb gently guided Eliza back toward Judge. "We need to go. You're soaked through, and that's not good for your leg." This time she didn't argue. They mounted up, the process made more difficult by the wet conditions, and headed back toward Elkhorn. The ride back was miserable. Cold rain soaking through their clothes, wind whipping across the valley, mud making the trail treacherous. But Eliza endured it without complaint, her arms tight around Caleb's waist, her body shivering against his back. By the time they reached the boarding house, they were both drenched and exhausted. Mrs. Chen took one look at them and immediately began issuing orders. Hot water for baths, dry clothes, hot soup, and strict instructions that both of them were to rest for the remainder of the day. "You catch cold from this foolishness. No one's fault but your own," she scolded as she helped Eliza toward her room. "But I still make you soup because I am too kind for my own good." Caleb retreated to his own room, peeling off his wet clothes and toweling himself dry. His body ached from the long ride and the tension of keeping Eliza safe and steady in the saddle. But more than physical exhaustion, he felt emotionally drained. The sight of that collapsed cabin, the weight of Eliza's grief and determination, the knowledge that she was deliberately pushing him away, even as circumstances kept pulling them together, it was all more complicated than any relationship he'd ever attempted. And that was the problem, wasn't it? He was thinking of this as a relationship when Eliza had made it clear that's not what she wanted. She wanted help getting back on her feet, nothing more. He needed to respect that, to keep his distance once she was settled, to return to the uncomplicated life of a drifting cowboy. Except Caleb wasn't sure he wanted that life anymore. Somewhere between pulling Eliza from that wreckage and riding through the rain with her arms around his waist, something had shifted in him. The idea of moving on, of leaving her and Rose behind, felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, but that settled in his gut like a stone. He dressed in dry clothes and was considering whether to go downstairs or just sleep when he heard a knock at his door. Opening it, he found Sarah Mitchell standing in the hallway, Rose in her arms. "Mrs. Monroe is asking for you," Sarah said quietly. "She's running a fever. Dr. Winters is with her now." Caleb's stomach dropped. "How bad?" "I don't know, but she's asking for you specifically. Said there are things she needs to discuss while she's still clear-headed." Sarah's expression was worried. "I think you should come." Caleb followed her downstairs to Eliza's room, his heart pounding. Dr. Winters met him at the door, his face grave. "The leg's infected," he said without preamble. "Probably from all that movement today. I've cleaned and redressed it, given her something for the fever, but the next 24 hours will be critical. If the infection spreads—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Can I see her?" "For a few minutes, but don't tire her out. She needs rest more than anything." Caleb entered the room to find Eliza propped up on pillows, her face flushed with fever, her eyes glassy but focused. She attempted a weak smile when she saw him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have insisted on going to the cabin." "Don't apologize. You did what you needed to do." Caleb pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Dr. Winters says you're going to be fine." "Dr. Winters is a terrible liar. I can see it in his face." Eliza reached out, and Caleb took her hand. Her skin was hot and dry. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, you'll make sure Rose is taken care of. That she goes to a good family, people who'll love her and raise her right. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway." Eliza's grip tightened with surprising strength. "I need to know she'll be safe, that she won't end up in some orphanage or with people who'll treat her badly. Promise me, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the intimacy of it combined with the desperation in her voice broke something open in his chest. "I promise," he said. "But you're going to be fine, Eliza. You're going to get through this and raise Rose yourself and show this whole town what you're made of." "I hope you're right." She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. "But just in case, thank you. For everything. You're a good man, Caleb Turner. Better than I deserve." That's not true. But she'd already drifted into fevered sleep, her hand still gripping his. Caleb sat there watching her breathe and made a silent vow that she would survive this. She had to. Because he'd already lost too many people in his life, and he wasn't ready to lose her too. Not when he just started to understand what it might mean to stay. The night stretched endless and dark, broken only by the rhythm of Eliza's labored breathing and the occasional cry from Rose in the makeshift cradle beside the bed. Caleb had stationed himself in a chair near the door, refusing to leave despite Dr. Winters' suggestion that he get some rest. Sarah had taken Rose for feeding and changing every few hours, but otherwise the baby remained close to her mother, as if even in her infant awareness she understood something was wrong. Mrs. Chen appeared periodically with cool cloths and fresh water, her face carefully neutral but her eyes betraying worry. Each time she checked Eliza's forehead, Caleb searched her expression for signs of improvement, but found none. The fever raged on, pulling Eliza in and out of consciousness, sometimes leaving her lucid enough to murmur a few words, other times dragging her into delirium where she called out for people Caleb didn't know and spoke of things that made no sense. Dawn arrived gray and reluctant, light seeping through the curtains like an afterthought. Caleb stood and stretched, his back protesting from hours in the chair. He moved to the window and looked out at Elkhorn stirring to life. Shopkeepers opening their doors, a wagon rolling down the muddy street, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys as people started their breakfast fires. Normal life continuing while in this small room, everything balanced on a knife's edge. "Caleb?" He turned quickly. Eliza was awake, her eyes clearer than they'd been in hours. The flush in her cheeks remained, but something about her gaze suggested the fever might be breaking. "I'm here." He was at her side in 3 strides, kneeling beside the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a horse." Her voice was weak but steady. "How long have I been out?" "About 18 hours. Dr. Winters has been checking on you every few hours. He says the next day or two, will tell us whether the infection is responding to treatment. And Rose? She's fine. Sarah's been taking care of her. She's actually been wonderful. The baby, I mean, eating well, sleeping between feedings, strong like her mother. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I was so stupid, going to that cabin, pushing myself when I should have been resting. And now look at me. If I die because of my own foolishness, you're not going to die. Caleb said it with more confidence than he felt. You're too stubborn for that. Stubborn doesn't cure infection. No, but it helps you fight it. And you're a fighter, Eliza. You've proven that. She was quiet for a moment, studying his face. You stayed? All night? Where else would I be? Living your own life, which is what I told you to do, if I remember correctly. Despite her weakened state, there was a hint of reproof in her tone. You're not responsible for me, Caleb. Maybe not, but I'm choosing to be here anyway. Before Eliza could respond, Dr. Winters entered, carrying his medical bag and wearing an expression that was marginally less grim than the night before. He examined Eliza's leg carefully, unwrapping the bandages and inspecting the wound. Caleb watched his face, trying to read the subtle shifts in expression. The swelling's down slightly, Dr. Winters announced after a thorough examination, and the wound looks marginally better. I won't say we're out of danger yet, but the signs are encouraging. Whatever you're doing, Mrs. Monroe, keep doing it. Lying here feeling like death? I can manage that. Good. Because you're going to be lying there for at least another week, possibly 2. No arguments, no attempts to get up and prove your independence. You wanted to establish yourself in this town. You can't do that if you're dead or crippled. Understood? Understood. Eliza sank back into the pillows, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Though I don't know how I'm supposed to pay for all this care. We'll worry about that when you're well. Dr. Winters packed up his instruments. For now, your job is to rest, take the medicine I'm leaving, and let other people help you. Think you can manage that? I can try. After Dr. Winters left, Sarah appeared with Rose, who had worked herself into a state of indignant hunger. Eliza took her daughter with visible relief, cradling her close and beginning to nurse. Caleb moved toward the door to give them privacy, but Eliza stopped him. Stay, please. I need to talk to you about something, and I want to do it while I'm clear-headed. Caleb settled back into his chair, carefully keeping his gaze away from the intimate scene of mother and child. Outside the window, he could hear the sounds of Elkhorn coming fully awake, conversations, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, a dog barking. I've been thinking, Eliza said after a moment, about what you said yesterday, about wanting to know me better, about not minding the complications. You don't need to address that now. You're sick. You should be resting. I'm addressing it now because I might not have the courage later. Eliza's voice was firm despite its weakness. I meant what I said about needing to establish myself independently, about not wanting to be seen as a woman who latches onto the first man who shows her kindness. But I've also realized something during this fever. She paused, adjusting Rose slightly. Caleb waited, his heart beating faster than it should. I've been alone in every way that matters for years. Even when James was alive, I was alone. Making decisions alone, facing problems alone, lying awake at night alone, even when he was sleeping right beside me. And I told myself that was fine, that I was strong enough to handle anything by myself, that depending on someone else was weakness. Eliza's eyes met his. But this fever, this infection, it's shown me that strength isn't the same as isolation, that accepting help isn't the same as being helpless. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong to push you away. Or not wrong exactly, but premature. I don't know what this is between us. It's too new, too complicated, too bound up in crisis and circumstance to have a name. But I'd like to find out. Once I'm well, once I can stand on my own 2 feet literally and figuratively, I'd like to see if there's something real here, or if it's just proximity and adrenaline. Caleb felt something unclench in his chest. I'd like that too. But I need you to understand something. Eliza's expression turned serious. I won't be rushed into anything. I won't make the same mistake I made with James, jumping into a relationship without really knowing the person. And I won't let Rose become attached to someone who might leave. So whatever this becomes, it has to be slow, careful, with both of us sure about what we're doing. I can do slow and careful. Can you? Because from what I've seen, you're a man who makes decisions quickly. You heard me screaming and rode straight into danger. You agreed to help me without knowing anything about me or my situation. You promised to take care of Rose if something happened to me, a promise that could bind you for years. Those aren't the actions of a careful man. Caleb had to smile at that. Fair point. But there's a difference between acting decisively in a crisis and rushing into something as important as... He hesitated, not sure what to call it. As important as whatever this might become, Eliza finished for him. Yes, that's exactly my point. Rose had fallen asleep at Eliza's breast, milk-drunk and peaceful. Eliza carefully adjusted her clothing and settled the baby against her shoulder, patting her back gently. The simple domesticity of the scene struck Caleb. This was what life could be if he chose it. Not just grand gestures and dramatic rescues, but quiet moments of care and connection. Feeding babies and changing bandages and sitting beside someone through the long watches of the night. I need to be honest with you about something, Caleb said. I'm not good at staying in one place. I never have been. Since the war ended, I've worked maybe 20 different ranches, never staying more than a season. The longest I've been in any town is 3 months, and that was only because I broke my leg and couldn't ride. Why? I don't know. Habit, maybe. Or fear of getting too attached to people or places. I lost so much during the war. Friends, family, any sense of home. It felt safer to keep moving, to never put down roots deep enough that tearing them up would hurt. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I'm tired of moving, Eliza. I'm tired of riding away from things instead of toward them. And when I think about leaving Elkhorn, leaving you and Rose, it feels wrong in a way nothing else has. That could just be the novelty of the situation, the drama of it all. It could be, but I don't think it is. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles on Rose's back. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. My father used to say that you can't know what you want until you know who you are. That too many people rush into things, marriages, business ventures, moves to new territories, without understanding themselves first. James did that. He was always chasing something he couldn't name, running from something he wouldn't face. And I enabled it by being so desperate to escape my own life that I didn't ask hard questions. What questions should you have asked? Who are you really? What do you want from life? Are you capable of staying when things get hard? Do you keep your promises? She looked at Caleb directly. Those are the questions I should have asked James. They're the questions I need to ask you. And more importantly, they're the questions I need to ask myself. Then ask them. All right. Eliza shifted carefully, wincing as her injured leg protested. Who are you really, Caleb Turner, beyond the heroic rescuer, beyond the helpful stranger? When the crisis is over and real life settles in, who will you be? Caleb considered the question seriously. I'm a man who spent 10 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. I'm someone who values freedom and open spaces and the ability to leave when things get complicated. But I'm also someone who honors my commitments, who doesn't make promises lightly, and who believes in doing what's right even when it costs me something. He paused. I'm also someone who's lonely, though I've been pretending I'm not. Someone who wants connection but has been too afraid to reach for it. What do you want from life? I used to want simple things. Good work, fair pay, a decent horse, food in my belly. But lately I want more than that. I want to build something that lasts. I want to belong somewhere. I want to matter to someone. He met her eyes. I want to figure out if this feeling I have when I'm around you and Rose is something real or just wishful thinking. Are you capable of staying when things get hard? I don't know. I never have before. But I want to be. And maybe that's enough to start with, the wanting to be different, even if I haven't proven it yet. Do you keep your promises? Always. Even when it costs me, even when breaking them would be easier. Eliza nodded slowly, processing his answers. Those are good answers, honest answers. But words are easy, Caleb. It's the follow-through that matters. I know, and I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can follow through. What if you can't? What if you wake up in 3 months or 6 months and realize you've made a terrible mistake? That you're not built for this kind of life, for the responsibility and the domesticity and the small-town gossip. Then I'll be honest with you about it. I won't just disappear. I won't leave you wondering or waiting. And I'll make sure you and Rose are taken care of before I go." Even as he said it, Caleb couldn't imagine actually leaving, but he understood why Eliza needed the assurance. "And what about you?" Caleb asked, turning the questions back on her. "Who are you really, Eliza Monroe? What do you want from life?" Eliza looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I'm a woman who made a bad choice when she was young and has been paying for it ever since. I'm someone who's stronger than she looks, but not as strong as she pretends to be. I'm a mother who would do anything to protect her child, even if it means accepting help from a stranger or admitting I can't do everything alone." She looked back up at him. "I'm also someone who's terrified of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person, of letting someone into our lives who will hurt us or leave us or prove to be as unreliable as James was. What do you want from life? Safety, stability, a home that won't collapse around us, a life where I'm not constantly waiting for the next disaster. I want Rose to grow up knowing she's loved and secure. I want to be able to support us through honest work, to hold my head up in this town, to build friendships and connections." She paused. "And I want to be able to trust someone again, to have a partner who keeps their promises and shows up when things get hard. But I don't need that to survive. I can build a good life for Rose and myself without it." "But would you want to, if you had the choice?" "I don't know. Ask me again when I'm not lying here with a fever and an infected leg, dependent on everyone's charity." Mrs. Chen knocked softly and entered with a tray of food, broth and bread for Eliza, something more substantial for Caleb. She set it down without comment, checked Eliza's forehead with the back of her hand, and nodded with satisfaction. "Fever is breaking, is good. You eat now. Keep strength up." She turned to Caleb. "You also eat. Then you go sleep in real bed. You look like dead man walking." "I'm fine." "You are stubborn man who thinks he must do everything himself, like someone else I know." Mrs. Chen shot a pointed look at Eliza. "Both of you, stop being so stubborn. Accept help. Rest. Heal. World will still be here tomorrow." After she left, Caleb and Eliza ate in companionable silence. The broth seemed to revive Eliza somewhat, bringing color back to her cheeks. Rose continued sleeping, oblivious to the adult conversations and concerns swirling around her. "Mrs. Chen is right," Eliza said after finishing her broth. "You should rest. You've been up all night. So have you." "I've been unconscious for most of it. That's different." She settled back against the pillows, clearly exhausted from even that brief conversation. "Go, Caleb. Sleep for a few hours. I'll still be here when you wake up." "Promise?" "Promise." Caleb reluctantly left the room and climbed the stairs to his own. He collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and was asleep within seconds, his last conscious thought that Eliza was going to be all right. The fever was breaking, the infection responding to treatment. She would survive this, and so would they, whatever they meant. He woke 4 hours later to afternoon sunlight streaming through the window and voices drifting up from downstairs. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure what day it was or why he felt like he'd been beaten with a board. Then memory flooded back. The fever, the long night, the conversation with Eliza that had felt like the most important discussion of his life. He washed his face in the basin, changed his shirt, and headed downstairs to find the boarding house in a state of controlled chaos. Several of the town's women had gathered in the dining room, apparently organizing some kind of effort on Eliza's behalf. Sarah was there, along with Mrs. Chen and 2 other women Caleb recognized from around town. Even Mrs. Harrington was present, though she stood slightly apart from the others, as if participating under protest. "Mr. Turner," Sarah noticed him first. "Good, you're awake. We're organizing a collection for Mrs. Monroe. Food, clothing, some money to help her get established once she's well. Several families have already contributed." "That's generous." "It's practical," Mrs. Harrington interjected. "The woman clearly can't manage on her own, and we can't have a widow and child starving in our town. It reflects poorly on all of us." "Prudence, must you always make charity sound like an obligation?" One of the other women, a younger woman with kind eyes who Caleb thought might be the schoolteacher's wife, shook her head. "Mrs. Monroe has been through a terrible ordeal. The least we can do is help her get back on her feet. I'm simply being realistic, Martha. Sentiment doesn't fill empty stomachs or pay rent. Neither does your sour attitude, but we tolerate that. The other women laughed, and even Mrs. Harrington's lips twitched slightly. Despite her harsh exterior, Caleb suspected she cared more than she let on. Some people just expressed kindness through criticism and organization rather than warm words. Has anyone told Eliza about this? Caleb asked. Not yet. We wanted to have everything organized first. Sarah gestured to several baskets and boxes stacked in the corner. We're also planning to help her find a proper place to live once she's mobile. Mrs. Chen's boarding house is wonderful for temporary situations, but Mrs. Monroe will need something more permanent. A small cottage, perhaps, with room for the baby. The Hendersons' old place is empty, Martha suggested. It's small but sturdy, and they moved back east last month. I bet they'd rent it cheap to a widow with good references. I could provide references, Sarah offered, based on what I've seen of her character in the past few days. And I'll speak to my husband about the teaching position, Martha continued. He's been struggling with the younger children, too many of them, not enough attention to go around. An assistant teacher would be invaluable. Caleb listened to them plan Eliza's future with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The help was genuine and badly needed, but he wondered how Eliza would react to having her life organized by well-meaning strangers. She valued her independence so fiercely, even when accepting it would be the smart thing to do. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah pulled him aside. I know Mrs. Monroe has her pride. We all do. But sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing a person can do. Will you help us convince her of that? I'll try. But you should know, when Eliza makes up her mind about something, convincing her otherwise is like trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon. Sarah smiled. Then it's fortunate we're not asking her to change her mind, just to accept a helping hand until she can stand on her own. That's different. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. More donations arrived, clothing for Eliza and Rose, food supplies, even a small crib that someone's children had outgrown, Dr. Winters stopped by and pronounced Eliza's condition much improved, though he maintained she needed at least another week of bed rest before attempting to walk on the injured leg. Caleb spent most of the day helping organize the donations and running errands around town. It felt good to be useful, to have concrete tasks rather than just sitting and worrying. But his thoughts kept returning to Eliza, to their conversation that morning, to the tentative agreement that there might be something worth exploring between them. As evening approached, he finally made his way back to her room, knocking softly before entering. Eliza was awake, sitting up against pillows and looking markedly better than she had that morning. The fever flush had faded, replaced by a healthier color, and her eyes were clear and alert. You look better, he said, pulling up the chair. I feel almost human again. Dr. Winters says the infection is responding well to treatment. Another week of bed rest, and I should be able to start putting weight on the leg again. She gestured to the space beside her bed, where several baskets now sat. Sarah brought me all this. Donations from people in town. She said you helped organize it? I just carried some boxes. The women did all the real work. It's overwhelming. All these people I don't know, helping me for no reason other than I need help. Eliza's voice was thick with emotion. Part of me wants to refuse it, to prove I don't need charity, but the sensible part of me knows I'd be a fool to turn it down. Then listen to the sensible part. I'm trying. It's just hard. I've been taking care of myself for so long that accepting help feels like admitting defeat. It's not defeat, it's community. It's what people do in small towns. They help each other through the hard times. Caleb leaned forward. You'll pay it forward someday, when you're on your feet and someone else needs help. That's how it works. When did you become so wise about community? I thought you were a drifter who never stayed anywhere long enough to build connections. I am, or I was, but I've seen how these towns work, even if I was never part of it myself. And maybe that's part of what I've been missing, belonging to something bigger than just myself. Rose began fussing in her cradle, and Eliza carefully reached over to pick her up. The movement made her wince, but she managed it. Caleb moved to help, but Eliza waved him off. I need to be able to do this myself. Dr. Winters says I should be building strength in my upper body to compensate for the leg. She settled Rose against her shoulder, patting the baby's back. Sarah also mentioned that her husband wants to talk to me about the teaching position. She said they'd be flexible about start dates, willing to wait until I'm fully mobile. That's good news. It is, and Martha Henderson mentioned a cottage I could rent. Small but affordable, with a garden plot that could provide vegetables. Eliza's expression was complex, gratitude mixed with something that looked like fear. It's all falling into place almost too easily. It makes me nervous. Why? Because nothing in my life has ever fallen into place easily. There's always a catch, always something that goes wrong at the last minute. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe this time there is no other shoe. Maybe this is just what happens when good people help someone who deserves it. Or maybe I'm being set up for an even bigger fall. But Eliza smiled as she said it, acknowledging the pessimism. I'm sorry. Years of disappointment have made me cynical. You're not cynical, you're cautious. There's a difference. They talked for another hour about nothing and everything. Caleb's plans to return to the Garrett Ranch and collect his pay, Eliza's hopes for the teaching position, Rose's development and the milestones she was reaching. Ordinary conversation, the kind that people who were getting to know each other might have. No drama, no crisis, just two people learning to be comfortable in each other's presence. As darkness fell and Mrs. Chen began lighting lamps throughout the boarding house, Caleb reluctantly stood to leave. He had promised Dr. Winters he wouldn't tire Eliza out, and despite her improved condition, she still needed rest. Caleb? Eliza caught his hand as he turned to go. Thank you for everything, for staying last night, for organizing the donations, for believing I can do this even when I'm not sure I believe it myself. You can do it. I have no doubt about that. I hope you're right. She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. And thank you for being patient with me, for understanding that I need to go slow. To be sure, not everyone would be willing to wait. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb said, and realized as he said it that it was true. Whatever else happened, whatever complications arose, he was choosing to stay, to see this through, to find out if the connection he felt with this woman and her daughter was real, or just the illusion created by extraordinary circumstances. He left the room and climbed the stairs to his own, the weight of that decision settling over him like a comfortable coat. He was staying. In Elkhorn, with Eliza and Rose, for as long as it took to see where this path led. It was the first time in 10 years he'd chosen to put down roots, and while it terrified him, it also felt right in a way nothing else had since before the war. Through the floorboards, he could hear Rose crying softly, and Eliza's voice soothing her, singing a lullaby he didn't recognize. The sounds of a family being formed piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Caleb Turner felt like he was home. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, though ordinary had become something Caleb had forgotten how to recognize. Each morning he woke to the sounds of Elkhorn stirring to life, and each morning he found himself checking on Eliza before doing anything else. It became ritual, a soft knock on her door, her voice calling him in, Rose gurgling happily in her cradle while Eliza worked on the exercises Dr. Winters had prescribed to strengthen her leg. You don't have to check on me every day, Eliza said one morning about 2 weeks after her fever had broken. She was sitting in the chair by the window, her splinted leg propped on a stool, working on some mending that Sarah had brought her. I'm not going to disappear. I know, but I want to. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching her fingers move deftly with needle and thread. Besides, if I don't check, Mrs. Chen scolds me for being neglectful. Mrs. Chen scolds everyone for everything. It's how she shows affection. Fair point. Caleb moved into the room and picked up Rose, who immediately grabbed at his shirt with her tiny fists. In the past 2 weeks, he'd become surprisingly comfortable with the baby, learning how to hold her properly, how to interpret her different cries, how to make her laugh by making ridiculous faces. How's the leg feeling? Better, stronger. Dr. Winters says I might be able to start walking with the crutch by next week, putting a little weight on it. Eliza set down her mending and watched Caleb with Rose, a soft expression on her face. She likes you. The feeling's mutual. Rose had wrapped her hand around Caleb's finger and was studying him with the intense focus that babies brought to everything. She's going to be strong, like her mother. I hope she's smarter than her mother, smart enough not to marry the first charming man who promises her the world. It was the first time Eliza had mentioned James in days, and the bitterness in her voice was new. Caleb set Rose back in her cradle gently before responding. You're being hard on yourself. You were young, and James was apparently very convincing. I was naive. There's a difference. Eliza picked up her mending again, her stitches more forceful than necessary. I saw what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there, and I let hope blind me to reality. We all do that sometimes. Do we? Because you seem like someone who sees things very clearly, who doesn't let emotion cloud judgment. Caleb had to laugh at that. You think I'm here because of clear judgment? I'm here because I can't seem to make myself leave, even though the logical part of my brain keeps suggesting I should. That's not clarity. That's stubbornness mixed with something I don't have a name for yet. Eliza looked up from her mending, meeting his eyes directly. And what does the logical part of your brain say exactly? That I should collect my pay from the Garrett Ranch and move on to the next job. That getting involved with a widow and her infant daughter is complicated in ways I'm not prepared for. That staying in one place goes against everything I've done for the past decade. He moved closer, sitting in the chair across from her. But there's another part, a louder part, that says none of that matters. That some things are worth the complications. What if that part is wrong? What if 6 months from now you regret staying? What if I don't? What if 6 months from now, or a year, or 5 years, this is exactly where I want to be? Caleb leaned forward. Eliza, I can't promise you that I won't make mistakes, or that there won't be hard times. But I can promise that I won't lie to you, and I won't leave without being honest about why. That has to be enough to start with. Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. Mr. Henderson is here. He wants to talk to Mrs. Monroe about the teaching job. Eliza's hand went to her hair self-consciously. Now? I'm not exactly presentable. You look fine, Caleb assured her, and Henderson's not the type to judge based on appearances. Mr. Henderson turned out to be a thin, scholarly man in his mid-40s with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. He settled into a chair that Mrs. Chen provided and got straight to business. Mrs. Monroe, my wife tells me you're educated and interested in teaching. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. My father insisted I complete my schooling, and I've always loved working with children. Before I married, I helped at the school in my hometown occasionally. Good. I'll be frank with you, I'm drowning. I have 43 students ranging from age 5 to 15, all in one room, all at different levels. The older children I can manage well enough, but the younger ones need more individual attention than I can provide. I need an assistant teacher who can work with the primer students while I focus on the advanced pupils. He pulled out a small notebook and flipped through it. The pay isn't much, $15 a month to start, but it's steady work, respectable, and the hours would allow you to keep your daughter with you. The schoolhouse has a small room in back where she could nap while you're teaching. $15 a month wasn't much, but combined with what Eliza could make from mending and other small jobs, it would be enough to live on modestly. Caleb could see her doing the calculations in her head. When would you need me to start? She asked. Not until you're fully mobile. Dr. Winters tells me another 3 weeks at minimum before you'll be able to walk without assistance. So let's say mid-November, once you're steady on your feet. That gives you time to heal and me time to prepare the students for a new teacher. Henderson stood, extending his hand. Do we have an agreement? Eliza shook his hand firmly. We do. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. You won't regret this. I'm certain I won't. My wife is an excellent judge of character, and she speaks very highly of you. He nodded to Caleb on his way out. Mr. Turner, good day. After he left, Eliza sat back in her chair, a smile spreading across her face. The first genuinely happy smile Caleb had seen from her since the cabin collapse. I have a job, she said, wonder in her voice. A real job, doing something I actually want to do. You deserve it. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just lucky that people in this town are willing to give me a chance. She looked down at her hands, still holding the mending. Everything's happening so fast. The job, the cottage that Martha showed me yesterday, the donations from the townspeople. A month ago, I was trapped in a failing marriage, waiting for a husband who was never coming home. Now I'm building an entirely new life. How does that feel? Terrifying, exhilarating, like standing on the edge of a cliff and not knowing if I'm about to fall or fly. She met his eyes. And you're a big part of that uncertainty. I don't want to be a source of uncertainty for you. But you are. Because as much as I'm drawn to you, as much as I appreciate everything you've done, I'm scared of repeating my mistakes, of trusting too quickly, of seeing what I want to see instead of what's really there. So what do we do about that? Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still absently working the needle through fabric. We take it slow, like we agreed. We spend time together as friends first. You let me get established in my job and my home. I learned to stand on my own 2 feet, literally and figuratively. And then maybe we see if there's something real between us, or if it's just the intensity of the circumstances that threw us together. I can do that. But Eliza, I need you to understand something. Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out at the street below. I'm not James. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't gamble with things that matter. When I say I'm staying, I mean it. When I say I want to see where this goes, I mean that too. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn that trust over time. That's all I needed to hear. Eliza set down her mending and attempted to stand, wobbling slightly on her good leg. Caleb was there immediately, steadying her, and for a moment they were close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could smell the lavender soap Mrs. Chen had given her. Steady, he said softly. I'm trying. But she wasn't just talking about her balance, and they both knew it. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and caution in equal measure. Then Rose began to fuss, breaking the spell, and Eliza carefully lowered herself back into the chair while Caleb went to tend to the baby. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of healing and preparation. Eliza's leg grew stronger daily until she could walk short distances with only a slight limp. The infection was a memory. The splint was removed, and Dr. Winters pronounced her recovery remarkable given the severity of the break. You're fortunate, he told her during her final examination, and stubborn. That combination saved your leg and possibly your life. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. During those weeks, Caleb found work at a nearby ranch, close enough that he could ride back to Elkhorn each evening. It wasn't the drifting life he'd lived before. This was steady employment with the understanding that he'd be around for the foreseeable future. The ranch owner, a weathered man named Patterson, had given him a knowing look when Caleb explained his situation. Woman and baby in town, huh? That's usually how it starts. Man thinks he's just helping out. Next thing he knows, he's building a life. Patterson had clapped him on the shoulder. Nothing wrong with that, son. Some of us are meant to roam, others are meant to settle. Sounds like you're figuring out which one you are. Caleb spent his evenings in Elkhorn, often eating dinner at the boarding house with Eliza and Rose, helping with whatever needed doing, and slowly learning the rhythms of domestic life. He fixed a broken window for Mrs. Chen, helped Sarah reorganize her store's inventory, and even found himself attending a town meeting about water rights, something that would have bored him senseless a month ago, but now felt relevant because it affected Eliza's future. He was settling in, putting down roots, and the strange thing was that it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like coming home. The cottage that Eliza had rented was small but sturdy. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a pump in the back for water. It needed work, and Caleb spent several weekends helping her prepare it. They painted the walls, patched holes in the roof, built shelves, and hung curtains that Sarah had donated. Rose observed it all from a basket Caleb had suspended from the ceiling, swaying gently like a tiny supervisor overseeing the renovation. This is going to be good, Eliza said one afternoon, standing in the doorway and surveying their work. A real home, mine and Rose's, something we can be proud of. It already is, Caleb said, coming up behind her with another load of firewood. You've made it yours. We've made it mine. You've done as much work as I have. I don't mind. Eliza turned to face him, leaning against the doorframe. Why? Why do you care so much about my cottage, my job, my life? You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why are you here painting walls and patching roofs? Because this matters. You matter. Rose matters. Caleb set down the firewood and dusted off his hands. And because for the first time in 10 years, I'm building something instead of just passing through. That feels important. It is important. Eliza reached out and touched his arm lightly. And I want you to know that I see it. All the work you've done, all the ways you've helped without asking for anything in return. I see it, and I'm grateful. I'm not doing it for gratitude. I know. That's what makes it matter. They stood there in the doorway, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows behind them, and Caleb felt something shift. The careful distance they'd maintained, the protective walls Eliza had built around her heart, they were still there, but they were lower now, more permeable. Like maybe she was beginning to believe that not every man who offered help would eventually demand payment. The day Eliza started her teaching job, Caleb rode into town early to make sure she and Rose got to the schoolhouse safely. It was unnecessary. The schoolhouse was only 3 blocks from her cottage, but Eliza accepted the escort with good grace. "First day nerves?" Caleb asked as they walked, Rose bundled in Eliza's arms. "Absolute terror," Eliza admitted. "What if the children don't like me? What if I can't control them? What if Mr. Henderson realizes he made a mistake? Then you'll figure it out. You're good at that." They reached the schoolhouse to find Mr. Henderson already there, organizing papers on his desk. He looked up when they entered and smiled. "Mrs. Monroe, excellent. The students will be arriving in about 20 minutes. Let me show you where you'll be working." He led them to the back of the room where he'd set up a small area with child-sized desks and a chalkboard. The room in back had been converted into a nursery of sorts, with Rose's cradle already installed along with supplies for her care. "Sarah and Martha organized that," Henderson explained. "They thought you'd feel better knowing Rose was close and well cared for." "This is wonderful, thank you." Eliza's voice was thick with emotion. "Everyone has been so kind." "You've given us reason to be. Now, shall we discuss the curriculum for the younger students?" Caleb excused himself, knowing Eliza needed to focus on her new job without worrying about him hovering. He spent the day working at the Patterson Ranch, but his mind kept drifting back to the schoolhouse, wondering how Eliza was managing, whether the children liked her, whether she was finding the work as fulfilling as she'd hoped. When he returned that evening, he found her in her cottage, Rose asleep in the cradle while Eliza sat at the small table, papers spread out before her. She looked exhausted, but happy. "How was it?" he asked. "Chaotic, wonderful, terrifying, perfect." Eliza gestured to the papers. "I'm already planning lessons for tomorrow. The children are sweet, most of them. A few are challenging, but Mr. Henderson says that's normal. And Rose was an angel all day, so sleeping and eating on schedule like she knew her mother needed her to behave. I'm proud of you." "Don't be proud yet. Wait until I've made it through a full week without any disasters." But she was smiling as she said it, though I did have one interesting conversation with Billy Patterson. I assume he's related to your Mr. Patterson? His youngest son. He asked if you were my beau. Apparently the whole town is speculating about our relationship status. Eliza's tone was light, but Caleb could sense the question underneath. "What did you tell him?" "That you were a good friend who'd helped me through a difficult time, which is true as far as it goes." She looked up at him. "But it's not the whole truth, is it?" "No, it's not." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Eliza, we've been dancing around this for weeks, being careful, taking it slow, making sure we're not rushing into anything. And that's good. It's what you needed, what we both needed. But I think it's time to be honest about what this is becoming." "Which is what?" "More than friendship. At least for me." Caleb reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Eliza placed her hand in his. "I'm not saying we need to rush into anything. I'm just saying that I want there to be something to rush into eventually. That I want to court you properly, with everyone knowing my intentions, and see where it leads." "Courting, that's very proper of you." But Eliza was smiling, her fingers tightening around his. "What if it leads nowhere? What if we discover we're not compatible, that the connection we feel is just gratitude and circumstance? Then at least we'll know. We'll have tried, honestly and openly, and if it doesn't work, we'll part as friends with no regrets." He paused. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen." "Why not?" "Because every time I'm around you, I feel like I've found something I didn't know I was looking for. Because Rose lights up when she sees me, and that matters more than I ever thought it could. Because when I think about the future, you and Rose are in it, and that doesn't scare me the way it should." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not James, Eliza. I know you're afraid I might be. that all men might be liars and gamblers and disappointments, but I'm asking you to take a chance on the possibility that I'm not. That I'm exactly what I seem to be, a man who's tired of running and ready to build something real." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I'm afraid of trusting wrong, of making another mistake, of letting Rose get attached to someone who might leave. But I'm also tired of being afraid, tired of letting James's failures dictate my future." She took a deep breath. "So yes, you can court me, properly, openly, with the understanding that I'm going to be cautious and probably difficult and definitely not easy to win over. I wouldn't want you any other way. And you need to understand that Rose comes first, always. If at any point I think this relationship is harming her or making her life unstable, I'll end it, no matter how much it hurts. I'd expect nothing less. Rose deserves that kind of protection." "Then we have an agreement." Eliza smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way he hadn't seen before. "Though I should warn you, once the town finds out we're officially courting, the gossip is going to be intense." "Let them gossip. I've got nothing to hide." The gossip was indeed intense. Within days, everyone in Elkhorn seemed to know that Caleb Turner was courting Eliza Monroe, and opinions were varied. Some, like Sarah and Martha, were openly supportive. Others, like Mrs. Harrington, had reservations about the speed of the relationship, though even she couldn't deny that Caleb had proven himself reliable and honorable in his treatment of Eliza and Rose. The winter months passed in a pattern that felt almost domestic. Caleb worked at the Patterson Ranch during the day, spent evenings with Eliza and Rose, and gradually became part of the fabric of Elkhorn. He helped neighbors with repairs, played cards with other ranch hands at the saloon on Saturday nights, and attended town functions with Eliza on his arm. Rose grew and changed, learning to sit up on her own, to grasp objects with intention, to smile and laugh at things she found amusing. Caleb found himself charting her development with the same attention he'd once given to horse training or weather patterns. When she said something that might have been TA while looking at him, he felt a surge of pride entirely disproportionate to the achievement. "She's trying to say your name," Eliza said, laughing at his expression. "Don't let it go to your head." "Too late. I'm already insufferable about it." They established rituals. Sunday dinners at Eliza's cottage, walks through town on warm afternoons, reading sessions in the evening where Caleb would hold Rose while Eliza read aloud from whatever book she'd borrowed from the Hendersons' collection. Simple things, the kind that built a life rather than just passing through one. In February, on a cold evening with snow falling softly outside, Caleb finally worked up the courage to voice what had been building in him for months. They were sitting by Eliza's stove, Rose asleep in her cradle, the cottage warm and comfortable around them. Eliza was mending one of Rose's tiny dresses, while Caleb whittled a small toy horse he was making for the baby. "Eliza," he said, setting down his knife, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up, immediately alert. "That sounds serious." "It is. Or it might be. I'm not sure yet." He took a deep breath, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first day of battle. "We've been courting for 4 months now, and I know we agreed to take things slow, to be careful, to make sure this was real before committing to anything permanent." "I remember." "Well, I'm sure. I've been sure for a while now, actually. Sure that this is real, that what I feel for you and Rose isn't going to fade or change. Sure that I want to spend my life with you, building a home and a family, and all the ordinary, extraordinary things that make life worth living." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Eliza's hands stilled on the mending, her eyes wide. "Caleb, I know it might seem fast to some people, but we've lived through more in these 4 months than most couples experience in years. We've seen each other at our worst and our best. We've built something real and solid and worth keeping." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Nothing fancy, but honest and beautiful in its simplicity. "I'm not offering you rescue, Eliza. I'm offering you partnership. A life where we face things together, where we both pull our weight, where we build something better than what either of us could manage alone." "What about Rose?" "What about her? She's part of this. I'm not asking to marry just you. I'm asking to become part of your family. To be the father she deserves, the one who shows up and keeps promises and loves her unconditionally. Caleb leaned forward. I know I can't replace James. I don't want to. But I can be the man who's there for her every day, who teaches her to ride and helps with her schoolwork and walks her down the aisle someday when she's grown. If you'll let me. Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now, but she was smiling through them. You're sure? Absolutely certain? Because once you commit to this, to us, there's no going back. Marriage is permanent, Caleb. It's not something you can walk away from when things get hard. I know, and I'm sure. He slid off his chair and knelt beside hers, taking her hand. Eliza Monroe, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you face down challenges that would break most people. I love how you are with Rose, how you've built a life from nothing but determination and hope. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the trust you're placing in me. So yes, I'm sure. The question is, are you? Eliza looked at him for a long moment, and Caleb could see the war playing out in her eyes, fear and hope, caution and desire, the weight of past disappointments measured against the promise of possible joy. Finally, she smiled. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was pulling her into his arms, careful of her still healing leg, holding her close, while she cried and laughed and clung to him like he was the answer to prayers she'd been afraid to voice. I love you too, she whispered against his shoulder. I think I have for a while, but I was too scared to admit it, too afraid of being hurt again. But you've shown me that not all men are liars, that some promises are kept, that trust can be earned. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding why I needed to be careful. Thank you for taking the chance anyway. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Elkhorn Church, with most of the town in attendance. Sarah and Martha served as witnesses, Mr. Henderson gave a short speech about new beginnings, and even Mrs. Harrington managed to say something almost complimentary about how sometimes unconventional relationships worked out despite all logical predictions. Rose, now 8 months old and sitting up on her own, babbled happily through the ceremony, drawing laughs from the assembled guests when she reached for Caleb at the most solemn moment. He picked her up without hesitation, and they exchanged vows with Rose between them, a family being formed through choice and commitment rather than blood. The years that followed were not without challenges. Caleb had to learn how to be a husband and father, how to navigate disagreements and disappointments without running away. Eliza had to learn to trust fully, to believe that Caleb's promises were solid even when life got difficult. Rose went through illnesses and growing pains, and there were nights when both Caleb and Eliza wondered if they were doing anything right. But through it all, they held to the commitment they'd made. When Caleb wanted to drift back into old patterns, Eliza called him on it, and he stayed and worked through whatever was making him restless. When Eliza's fear of abandonment surfaced, Caleb reassured her with actions rather than just words, proving day after day that he was there for the long haul. They had more children, a son they named Daniel, born 2 years after the wedding, and then twin daughters, Emma and Clara, arriving 3 years after that. The cottage became too small, and they built a larger house on the land Caleb had purchased just outside town. Rose grew up strong and smart, excelling in school and never quite remembering the father who'd abandoned her or the cabin that had nearly killed her. To her, Caleb was simply Papa, the man who'd always been there. Caleb continued working the Patterson ranch, eventually becoming foreman and then partner as Old Man Patterson aged and needed help managing the operation. Eliza taught for 15 years before retiring to focus on their growing family, though she continued tutoring students privately. They became pillars of the Elkhorn community, the kind of people others turned to in crisis, who organized barn raisings and helped neighbors through hard times. 23 years after Caleb had pulled Eliza and Rose from that collapsed cabin, he found himself standing in almost the same spot. The land had been sold and resold over the years, and the new owners had finally cleared away the last remnants of the old structure and built something new. But Caleb remembered exactly where each piece had fallen, where he'd crawled through debris, where he'd heard Eliza's voice calling for help. "What are you thinking about?" Eliza asked, coming up beside him. She was 50 now, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of laughter and sun. beautiful, in Caleb's opinion, in ways that had nothing to do with youth. That cabin, that day. How different my life would be if I'd been riding a different fence line, or if the wind had been blowing from another direction, or if I'd decided to ignore what I heard. Do you regret it? The life we've built? Not for a second. Caleb put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Though I do sometimes wonder who I'd be if I'd kept drifting, if I'd never learned what it meant to stay. Lonely, Eliza said simply. You'd be lonely, even if you didn't realize it. She was probably right. Before Eliza and Rose, before Elkhorn and the ranch and the community he'd built, Caleb had been moving through life rather than living it, going through motions, existing but not thriving, convincing himself that freedom and solitude were the same thing. Rose is getting married next month, Eliza said, changing the subject. Can you believe it? Our little girl, all grown up and starting her own family. I can't, but I also can. She's always been strong and determined, like her mother. Caleb smiled. Thomas is a good man. He'll treat her right. He better, or he'll have to answer to you. They stood there for a while longer, looking at the valley where so much had changed and so much had stayed the same. The land was still beautiful, still harsh, still full of possibility for those brave enough or foolish enough to try building a life on it. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. For what? For staying. For choosing us every day, even when it would have been easier to leave. For being the father Rose needed and the husband I didn't know I was looking for. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For proving that some promises are kept and some men are exactly what they seem to be. Thank you for taking the chance on me, for trusting me despite every reason you had not to, for building this life with me. Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love you, Eliza. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you too. They walked back to their wagon hand in hand, leaving the valley behind but carrying its memory with them. That collapsed cabin, that desperate rescue, that moment when Caleb had chosen to dig through wreckage with his bare hands. It had been the beginning of everything, not just a rescue, but a transformation, not just saving 2 lives, but creating 3. At home, the house was full of noise and life. Daniel was arguing with the twins about something. Rose had arrived early to help with wedding preparations, and the kitchen smelled of the bread Eliza had started that morning. Normal chaos, the kind that came from a house full of people who loved each other. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. This was what he'd been missing during all those years of drifting, the sense of belonging, of being essential to other people's happiness, of building something that would outlast him. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but it was real in ways that nothing else in his life had ever been. Papa, Emma called from the kitchen, Mama says you're supposed to fix the pump. It's making that sound again. I'm on it. Caleb hung up his hat and headed for the kitchen, ready to fix whatever needed fixing, to solve whatever problems needed solving, to be present for whatever came next. Because that's what family meant. Not just the grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but the daily choice to show up, to do the work, to keep the promises you'd made even when, especially when, life got ordinary and mundane. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Caleb and Eliza sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge. The night was cool, but not cold, and somewhere in the distance they could hear a coyote calling. Do you ever think about what might have been? Eliza asked. If James had come home that day? If the cabin hadn't collapsed? If you hadn't been riding that particular fence line? Sometimes, but not with regret, just curiosity. Caleb reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I think we would have found each other eventually, one way or another. Some things are just meant to be. You believe in fate now? That's new. I believe that when something is right, when 2 people are meant to build a life together, circumstances have a way of arranging themselves. Whether you call that fate or luck or simple chance doesn't really matter. What matters is that we found each other, and we chose to stay. Every single day, Eliza agreed. That's the part people don't talk about, that love isn't just one big decision. It's 1,000 small ones made over and over again. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the stars multiply. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight was simply about being present, about appreciating what they'd built from the ruins of that collapsed cabin and the wreckage of Eliza's first marriage. Inside the house, Rose was staying overnight to help with wedding preparations. Through the window, Caleb could see her moving around the guest room, her silhouette backlit by lamplight. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, strong, educated, capable of making her own choices and standing by them. Nothing like the helpless infant he'd pulled from that wreckage 23 years ago, and everything he and Eliza had hoped she'd become. "We did good," he said to Eliza. "We did. All of us together." She squeezed his hand. "And we're not done yet. There are grandchildren to spoil, Daniel and the twins to see through whatever comes next, this ranch to keep running, plenty of life left to live. Then let's live it, together." "Together," Eliza echoed, "every single day." And as the stars wheeled overhead and the Montana night settled around them, Caleb Turner, former drifter, reluctant settler, husband and father and man who'd finally found his place in the world, felt something he'd been chasing for 10 years without knowing it. He felt home, the story that had begun with screams echoing across a valley, with a cowboy digging through wreckage with his bare hands, with a desperate mother shielding her baby from catastrophe, had transformed into something quieter but no less powerful. A family forged not by blood or circumstance, but by choice, by showing up, by keeping promises even when it was hard, by choosing each other over and over again, until choice became commitment, and commitment became love, and love became the foundation of everything that mattered. Some families are born, others are built, piece by piece, decision by decision, from the wreckage of what came before into something stronger and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. This was one of those families. And their story, like all the best stories, was about transformation, about how a single moment of courage can ripple outward through time, changing not just one life but many, creating something that endures long after the initial crisis has faded into memory. The cabin had collapsed, but from its ruins, a home had risen, and that made all the difference.